Chapter 540. Your Excellency. The voice of a guard sounded from outside the tent. Come in. Lanning didn't stop reading the files and said casually. The guard opened the curtain and came in. Your Excellency, someone wants to see you. See me? Lanning raised his head and glanced at the guard with displeasure. Have you forgotten my words? Lanning was a corps commander and a new noble under Han Jin's command. Naturally, there were many people who wanted to establish a relationship with him, but Lanning had always politely declined this kind of thing. Unable to bear the harassment, he issued an order to not see any unimportant people. It's not like that, Your Excellency, the guard said with some embarrassment. In his heart, he had already cursed the informant half to death. That man said there was an urgent military situation. So an urgent military situation? Lanning frowned. At present, there was no military situation around the Holy Crown City. The closest thing was the war in the Freedom Federation. Thinking of this, Lanning began to feel a little nervous. Let him in. The guard breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly ran out. After a moment, he let a simple and honest middle-aged man in an old gray robe in. The man in gray stood in front of Lanning in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. It seemed that he didn't realize that he was facing a corps commander who held the power of life and death in his hands. Instead, he smiled and bowed. Your Excellency Lanning, do you know me? Hearing the man's tone, Lanning couldn't help but be startled. He carefully looked at the man in gray several times, but couldn't remember where he had seen him before. What made Lanning feel strange was that he didn't see any decisiveness of a soldier in this man. Such an inconspicuous person, if thrown into the street, would immediately be drowned by the crowd. He was simply extremely ordinary. The man in gray didn't immediately answer Lanning's question. Instead, he turned around and looked at the guard behind him. You go out first, Lanning said to the guard knowingly. After the guard went out, Lanning's eyes fell on the man in gray. Please sit down. Can you speak now? First of all, shouldn't you first prove that you are Lanning? The man in gray naturally walked to one side and sat down. His words made Lanning's eyes narrow into a line. The man in gray didn't seem to notice Lanning's sharp gaze. He even had the leisure to pick up the cup beside him and take a sip. At this moment, Lanning felt that the situation was a little strange. The person in front of him was either crazy or had other motives. You want me to prove myself in my camp? It sounded like a joke, but Ronning's expression gradually became solemn. There must be a reason behind this abnormality. If you think it's necessary, here's my seal. Lanning slowly took out his seal and placed it on the table. The gray-robed man came forward and examined the seal carefully. Then, he handed it to Lanning with both hands. Please forgive my rudeness, Lord Lanning. This is a serious matter. I have to be cautious. Then, shouldn't it be my turn to ask? Who are you? Lanning asked as he put the seal back into his pocket. I'm Pollen. The gray-robed man smiled strangely. This smile on his simple and honest face gave him an inexplicable sense of mystery. Lanning paused for a moment, then slowly nodded, as if he had already expected the answer. In fact, he was even more confused. Pollen? What the hell is that? However, it was definitely not the right time to ask questions. Even if Lanning had a big question, he could only bury it in his heart. Lanning's reaction made the gray-robed man more certain of Lanning's identity. Lord Leonardo asked me to inform you that Prince Johnson will lead the Devil Squad to attack the Holy Crown City in the next few days. Please be prepared to receive them at any time, the gray-robed man said, with eagerness in his eyes. After lurking for so many years, he finally got this day. How could he not be excited? Anything else? Lanning asked expressionlessly. But in his heart, there was a storm. Attack the Holy Crown City? Who was Leonardo? Who was Prince Johnson? And why did this guy come to tell him this? With so many questions, Lanning was so nervous that he almost couldn't breathe. But he still tried to pretend to be calm. No. As you know, while maintaining high efficiency in emergency communication, it's destined that there can't be too much information transmitted. You don't even know the exact time of the attack. There was a hint of nervousness in Lanning's voice. He could already tell that the person in front of him belonged to a spy agency. Such people had undergone harsh training. For them, torture was not very useful. Their only chance was to get as much information as possible from him. I'm sorry that Lord Leonardo only told me this much. Perhaps because the gray-robed man was still excited, he didn't notice the slight change in Lanning's tone. I know what to do. After pondering for a long time, Lanning really couldn't think of a good way to get more information without arousing the gray-robed man's suspicion. So he had to say something ambiguous. Then, Lord Lanning, I'll leave now. I'll wait for your good news when I get back. The gray-robed man saluted and looked up at Lanning. In this case, Lanning had to stand up against his will. He walked over and patted the gray-robed man's shoulder with a smile. You're wrong. It's our good news. Yes, our good news. The gray-robed man's eyes were full of smiles. The two looked at each other and laughed at the same time. The only difference was that the gray-robed man was laughing very happily, while Lanning's heart was in a mess. After the gray-robed man left, Lanning immediately called the guards in. Get a few more people, smart ones. Keep an eye on him and report to me at any time. After the guards ran out in confusion, Lanning didn't even have time to clean up the files on the table. He just put on a coat and rushed out of the tent. Half an hour later, Guevara, who was sitting in the mayor's mansion, saw Lanning, who looked nervous. What? Along with Guevara's exclamation, there was a loud bang in the living room. Guevara's reaction was far more exaggerated than Lanning had imagined. This wise old man, who was usually calm and collected, seemed to have heard a shocking secret. He even knocked over the table in front of him. Lanning was also a little confused. Even if the news was true, although Hanjin was not there, Guevara and Jedis were still there. It was not an exaggeration to say that the Holy Crown City was an impenetrable fortress. Therefore, a large part of Lanning's nervousness came from the upcoming war. Lanning was already very regretful that he could not follow Hanjin to the Freedom Federation. This news made Lanning feel that he could be of use again. In fact, he was also a little excited. Where's the informant? I've already sent someone to keep an eye on him, but I didn't dare to do anything. Whether the news is true or not, I'm afraid that torture will not work on such a person. I want to see if I can find something from him. Lanning replied. The news is true. Guevara took a deep breath. Ordinary people can't know the name Johnson. Who is he? Looking at Guevara's serious expression, Lanning became more curious. Prince Johnson. His other identity is the brother of the great demon Donald. Guevara said word by word. W.H. What? There was another loud bang. Lanning's eyes widened, and his reaction was the same as Guevara's. He stood up and knocked over the chair he was sitting on. You go find Jedis first. I'll go right away. Guevara did not care about Lanning, who was still in shock. After he finished speaking, he turned around and walked into the hall. Sir, could it be a prank? Lang Ning said with difficulty. I just said, ordinary people can't know about Prince Johnson. But, why would he give us the news? Lang Ning murmured, and then his expression changed greatly. He said he was pollen. Could it be the hell purple flower? But it doesn't make sense. Why would the hell purple flower help us? Don't think so much, Guevara said slowly. Be on full alert. If the news is false, we won't lose anything. But if it is true, we will be careless. That will be an unforgivable mistake. Lanning did not wake up until Guevara's figure disappeared from the hall. He quickly ran out of the door, mounted his horse, and galloped in the direction of the Holy See. When Guevara reappeared, he had already changed into a military uniform and stood majestically in front of the Castellan's mansion. The merciless passage of time had left wrinkles on the old man's face, but it still couldn't erase the lofty sentiments hidden in it. I hope I can hold on until you come back, Guevara muttered to himself as he looked to the southeast. Then he clenched the knight's lance in his hand and strode out. Like a small stone thrown into a lake, it stirred up ripples and broke the tranquility of the Holy Crown City. At this moment, the Holy Crown City was like a fully wound machine. Once the order was given, it immediately began to run in an orderly manner. The magician towers in the city lit up one after another, and a faint light curtain covered the entire Holy Crown City. Soldiers poured out of the barracks and lined up in neat phalanxes. Magic crystal cannons were moved to the top of the city wall. The black muzzles of the cannons were like ferocious beasts that only wanted to devour people, quietly lurking there. Guevara's order was very simple. Hold on until Han Jin came back. Although Guevara did not say how long he would hold on, or when Han Jin would come back, it seemed that no one doubted it. Han Jin had become the true guardian of the Holy Crown City. It seemed that as long as Han Jin was there, they would have nothing to fear. Didn't Raphael set up a magic array? Jeds suddenly remembered that Han Jin had been very busy in the days before he went to the Freedom Federation. Only he can activate that magic array. Guevara, he said helplessly, but if we keep the magic array on, I'm afraid we won't be able to hold on for long. Jed said worriedly, we have to keep it on all the time. Otherwise, with the speed of the abyssal great demon, it can teleport into the city before we can react. Guevara was well aware of this, but no matter what, they could not let the abyssal great demon rush into the city. Without Han Jin, no one here could effectively stop the abyssal great demon. Although Jeds and Guevara were not weak, they could not take care of such a large city. Instead of watching the great demon destroy the magician towers, it was better to keep the magic array on all the time, even if they had to wait until the magic crystals ran out. The longer they delayed, the greater the chance of victory. Everyone's eyes turned to the southeast, as if all their hopes were pinned there. Asterisk, 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 asterisk time flew. On this day, in a dense forest more than 50 miles away from the Holy Crown City, a dozen abyssal great demons stood there quietly, as if they were waiting for something. The leader was Prince Johnson, the younger brother of the great demon Donald. There was still a long wound on his chest that extended from his left shoulder to his right rib. There were purplish-black blood clots everywhere around the wound. His grayish-white muscles were curled up, and there were stars flickering in them from time to time. However, the owner of this body didn't seem to care about such a serious injury. His body was still standing straight, and he gave off an unshakable feeling just by standing there casually. Suddenly, there was a fluctuation in the air, and the figure of an abyssal great demon emerged. Your Royal Highness. The abyssal great demon who had just appeared bowed respectfully, with a hint of fear in his voice. Prince Johnson's gloomy eyes swept across the face of the great demon in front of him, and he sighed softly. Is it still not working? Your Royal Highness, that place is really strange. No matter which direction I approach from, I feel a sense of trepidation. But I can't sense any element fluctuation there at all. The abyssal great demon said, with a bit of shame on his face. As a great demon, it was unjustifiable for him to be frightened by something he could not see. You can't sense any element fluctuation at all? Prince Johnson pondered for a while and asked, how large is the range? It's about 50 meters away from the magic shield of the Holy Crown City. It gives me the feeling that someone has covered it with a layer of something. No matter whether there is any element fluctuation or not, since the magic shield is real, it must be supported by magic crystals. It's not a big deal for you to feel that way. Maybe it's Raphael's doing. Prince Johnson said slowly, it seems that it's going to be another tough battle. Your Royal Highness, you mean let the hellhounds go? I like to see how long they can hold on. Prince Johnson's face flashed a trace of fierceness. The great demons of the abyss looked at each other. They knew that this wasn't a wise decision, but they had no other choice at the moment. In order to achieve the goal of catching the enemy off guard, they didn't bring the slow-moving troops like the evil eyes and Medusas with them. Prince Johnson's original plan was to directly rush into the Holy Crown City and destroy the Mage Tower with the demon's teleportation ability while the Holy Crown City was unprepared. That way, without the magic shield, the Holy Crown City would have no resistance in front of the Minotaurs and the Hellhounds. But unexpectedly, the Holy Crown City seemed to have known that they were coming. The magic shield in the city was activated all day long, which made Prince Johnson's plan fail. This was the disadvantage of having no long-range attack power. If the evil eyes and the Medusas were here, no magic shield would be able to withstand their attacks. But now, they could only use the Hellhounds' lives to make up for it. I hope I'm right. Prince Johnson thought silently. Usually, the Mage Tower in the city would only activate the magic shield when it was in danger. No city could keep the magic shield activated all the time, because it would consume an astronomical amount of magic crystals. Regarding the situation in the Holy Crown City, Prince Johnson thought it was just an accident. Maybe he accidentally exposed his whereabouts. The reason why he ordered the Hellhounds to attack was not that he didn't care about the casualties of the Hellhounds, but that he really needed this victory. And according to various signs, the Holy Crown City had activated the magic shield when they were passing through the forest. Even if it was not attacked, no city could keep it activated for a long time. Under the continuous attack of the Hellhounds, their magic crystals would soon be exhausted. In short, it could be described in one word: consumption. Let's see who would be the winner in the end. The overwhelming Hellhounds rushed to the Holy Crown City, as if they were covering the earth with a layer of black carpet. Behind the Hellhounds, there were countless minotaurs wandering around. As long as the Hellhounds tore a hole, they would rush up and smash all the human beings who dared to block them with their sharp axes. However, when the Hellhounds rushed to within 50 meters of the magic shield of the Holy Crown City, they suddenly stopped, as if they were frightened. Immediately, they were knocked down to the ground by their companions, who rushed up from behind, and then stepped on by their companions from behind. Suddenly, the Hellhounds became a mess under the city. The defenders on the city wall did not let go of this rare opportunity. The remaining dozen magic crystal cannons on the city wall roared at the same time, pouring out fire and blowing up the Hellhounds under the city wall into pieces of flesh and blood. The magicians of the Magic Legion of the Holy Crown City immediately rushed to the city wall, with colorful magic halos blooming one after another. Some of the Hellhounds who had survived the magic and the cannons seemed to have not woken up from the fright. They desperately ran back and collided with their companions who were rushing up from behind, causing more chaos. Ripples appeared in the air, and one by one, the great demons of the abyss roared loudly and showed up. With the flashing of their blades, they dismembered the Hellhounds who were trying to escape into countless small pieces. The bloody means frightened the Hellhounds, who no longer cared about the inexplicable fear in their hearts. In contrast, the scythes of the great demons of the abyss were more terrible. They rushed to the city wall without thinking about their own safety. The appearance of the great demons of the abyss also caused a great psychological impact on the defenders of the Holy Crown City. This kind of creature, which was as famous as angels, had always been synonymous with nightmares. Fortunately, under the protection of the magic shield, the soldiers on the city wall could still suppress the fear in their hearts and desperately attacked the Hellhounds with cannons and arrows. What I'm wondering is, do they intend to use these guys to exhaust our magic crystals? Seeing that the enemy did not have any long-range attack power, Jedis was not as worried as before. Although the magic shield of the Holy Crown City might not be able to resist these Hellhounds forever, the problem was that it was not easy for them to break the magic shield. In fact, no army on the continent dared to attack a city with a magic shield by force, which meant that the number of casualties would reach an astronomical figure. What does Johnson want to do? Guevara was also puzzled. Chapter 541. The magic shield that covered the whole Holy Crown City was constantly twisting under the endless attacks of the Hellhounds. It seemed that the Hellhounds could tear the light curtain into pieces if they continued to attack. But unfortunately, the magic shield, which looked like it would collapse in the next moment, was still standing there, like a giant ship stubbornly sailing in the ocean. No matter how fierce the storm was, it refused to sink. As time went by, the corpses of the Hellhounds piled up into hills under the city wall. However, the other Hellhounds did not flinch. They stepped on the corpses of their companions and rushed to the city wall wave after wave. The soldiers and magicians on the city wall did not have any special reaction to the ghastly corpses in front of them. They didn't even need to aim. They just numbly pulled their bowstrings and released magic. When someone fell down due to exhaustion, another person would immediately take his place. The whole scene was extremely bloody. The thick smell of blood permeated the air above the battlefield. The sticky blood flowing like a river dyed the black ground dark red. Jedis and Guevara had to believe that Prince Johnson was really determined to use the hellhounds to break into the Holy Crown City. But the question was, what made him make such an irrational decision? In the distant, dense forest, Prince Johnson looked in the direction of the battlefield. His eyes flickered, as if there was something difficult for him to decide. It seemed that he had been unlucky ever since he set foot on the ground. Not only was he severely injured by Nicholas, but the battle that should have been an easy victory had also become a mess. In fact, before they went north, everyone, including Donald, was full of confidence in this battle. Raphael's troops would never expect that the abyssal race would attack the Holy Crown City. He first led the demon squad to rush into the Holy Crown City and destroy all the mage towers. Then, the hellhounds and minotaurs would arrive and flood the Holy Crown City. But who knew that the Holy Crown City seemed to have already known their attack plan and kept the magic array running at all costs. However, he had to hold on. His elder brother's words kept echoing in his ears. "We need a glorious victory, Your Highness." An abyss great demon could no longer hold back and knelt in front of Johnson. "Do it. If it goes on like this, all the hellhounds will die before we use up all their magic crystals." Johnson's expression was a bit complicated. If he could exchange the Holy Crown City with the death of all the hellhounds, he would do it without hesitation. However, after a whole day, the hellhounds had lost more than 200,000 soldiers, and the damn magic shield still showed no sign of collapsing. Did they bring all the magic crystals of the whole continent to the Holy Crown City? "Your Highness." The rest of the great demons of the abyss also knelt in front of Johnson. It was not that they were sad about the death of the hellhounds. Demons would never care about such inferior vassal races. The key was that the Holy Crown City was where the Holy Crown City was. Without enough cannon fodder as cover, no demon would be willing to face the light magic of the priests. Johnson was no exception. However, if they attacked the magic shield, it meant that there would be casualties. Every abyss great demon was a precious fighting force. Johnson really did not want to lose them here. Johnson slowly pulled out his scythe from the ground. He could not wait any longer. The Holy Crown City was already so difficult to deal with without Hanjin. He could not imagine what the situation would be like when Hanjin got the news and came back. Remember, retreat after the first attack. Even if their magic shield is broken, no one is allowed to enter the Holy Crown City without my order. Johnson glanced at the abyss great demons kneeling in front of him one by one. These were all warriors who had participated in the battle of the Kingdom of Magnificent Light. They were the best among the abyss great demons. He could not let any accident happen to them. Yes, more than a dozen abyss great demons answered in unison and disappeared into the dense forest at the same time. "How long can our magic crystals last?" Guevara asked Jedis as he watched the tragic scene with his penetration eyes. "If it's only this level of attack, it can last at least 4 days. Jedis calculated carefully and then smiled. "Fortunately, we have Morgan's secret treasure. Otherwise, I'm afraid we can't even last a day." Yes, sometimes I wonder why Raphael always gets lucky. Guevara straightened up and said with a smile. Hearing Guevara's words, Jedis just shook his head with a smile and did not speak. In the whole Holy Crown City group, perhaps only Guevara was qualified to call Hanjin a kid. He would never do that. Guevara looked at Lanning and asked, "How's the morale of the soldiers? Is it okay?" "There's no problem." Lanning was also in a good mood. It seemed that the Abyss army was not as terrible as the legend said. As long as the magic shield is still there, our soldiers are safe. You don't know, but now they are rushing to get on the city wall. Guevara nodded with relief. The Abyss army came at the right time. It was tantamount to training the soldiers for Hanjin. He believed that the soldiers who had experienced this battle would have enough courage to face any kind of war in the future. At this moment, there was a sudden change outside the city. A pitch-black sickle suddenly appeared above the hellhounds and fiercely slashed on the magic shield. The magic shield that couldn't even be shaken by the combined attacks of hundreds of hellhounds shook violently. The soldiers and mages on the city wall were all startled by the sudden appearance of the great abyssal demon, but none of them stopped what they were doing. It seemed to have become their instinct, and they were still subconsciously releasing spells and arrows, but none of them realized that they should be attacking the great abyssal demon that had suddenly appeared. After the abyss great demon slashed, its figure immediately disappeared. Then, one by one, tall and burly figures appeared and disappeared one after another. Thousands of minotaurs, who had been wandering around the periphery, also roared and rushed to the city wall. They finally made their move. Guevara picked up the knight's spear beside him and dashed forward. His entire body turned into a pale green stream of light and smashed the door into pieces. He then dashed towards the direction of the city wall. Notify the priests to join the battle. Jedis immediately cast a levitation spell and quickly flew out. The three paladins also rushed out. Their mission was to protect Jedis. The most effective attack against the Abyss Great Demon was not the long swords in their hands, but Jedis' magic. In a short period of time, more than a dozen Abyss Great Demons had already slashed hundreds of times. The Minotaurs also rushed to the forefront. They did not care about the attacks on the city wall and desperately waved their battle axes. Seeing this scene, the soldiers and mages quickly changed their targets to the demons and Minotaurs. However, each demon stayed in the air for less than a second, so their attacks all missed. At this time, the Hellhounds, who were not attacked, began to attack the magic shield even more crazily. For a moment, the soldiers on the city wall were somewhat at a loss. They did not know whether to attack the Abyss Great Demons or the Hellhounds below. Jedis' eyes flickered. Although the Abyss Great Demon army seemed to be going all out, his heart was still calm. There were not many people who had this kind of quality, and Jedis was definitely one of them. High Shizi, Jedis said slowly. Sir, Cardinal High Shizi, who was commanding the priests, hurriedly greeted him. Jedis glanced at High Shizi. He knew in his heart that during this time, High Shizi and Chipango, who was under Hanjin, had a good relationship. Chipango had given High Shizi a house and even a few Abyss Sirens, which High Shizi had accepted. In terms of character, High Shizi lacked the self-restraint necessary to be at the top, but the Holy See, which had many things to do, did not allow Jedis to be picky. Moreover, High Shizi's loyalty was not in vain. When the unsetting Sun Mountains were captured, Archbishop Zachary surrendered, and several cardinals were killed. As a deacon, High Shizi, together with several other famous cardinals, resolutely led the cardinals to forcibly break out of the encirclement. This was how the Holy See was preserved. If High Shizi had followed Nicholas back then, he would have been put in an important position. Take a few people and return to the Holy See, Jedis said softly. If we can't hold on, immediately activate the Holy See's magic array. High Shizi was stunned, and the expression on his face became very complicated. It seemed that he wanted to laugh, but he did not dare to do so at this time. He then hurriedly said, Yes, Your Holiness. Letting High Shizi be in charge of the Holy See was a kind of affirmation in itself. In the event of an accident, such as Jedis dying in battle, High Shizi would naturally become the successor. Sir, aren't you too pessimistic? Adonis said softly as he looked at High Shizi's back. This is obviously a demon squad, Jedis said slowly. Jeds said slowly. Ronning's information is correct. Prince Johnson must be hiding nearby. The inheritance of the god of death, Ord said in a deep voice. No one answered, and the air seemed to have frozen. The demons of the abyss were the most loyal servants of the god of death. This was similar to the priests who were willing to dedicate their lives to the god of light. The difference between the two was that if the demons of the abyss met some kind of opportunity in the demon pool and communicated with the god of death and obtained the inheritance of the god of death, then they would have the ability to release magic while maintaining a strong combat strength. In the most straightforward words, they were a true dual cultivator of magic and martial arts, just like Adolf the ascetic. However, the Holy See only had one Adolf, and there were more than one great demon with the inheritance of the god of death. Prepare for the worst. Jedis let out a long sigh. Ha! I have never hated that person as much as I do now. Sir, who do you hate? Amij asked. Who else could it be? Of course it's Raphael. Jedis smiled bitterly. Damn it. You took away the Holy Sea's greatest protection, the Holy Crystal. The Holy Crown City had held on for a whole day, and the reinforcements had never appeared. Did Han Jin really not discover the movements of the Abyss Army? The magic shield that covered the Holy Crown City was twisting more and more violently, but the Minotaurs and Hellhounds did not care and were still desperately rushing forward. More than a dozen great demons of the Abyss kept flashing in the air, and every time they appeared, they would swing their scythes. At this moment, all the effective defense facilities of the Holy Crown City were built by Dismark. Not only did Han Jin not add anything, but he also moved the magic crystal cannons on the city wall to the God of War. More importantly, Dismark would not use all the resources on defense. His main opponent was Zagund, so as long as the magic shield could withstand the impact of Zagund's army, it would be enough. There was a limit to this. Dismark would not expect himself to fight more than a dozen great demons of the Abyss and countless elite Abyss army. Moreover, Dismark had limited resources, so building more mage towers would be useless, and he would also waste a lot of magic crystals. This limit was nothing in the past, but under the constant attacks of the Abyss army, the fatal flaw was undoubtedly exposed. The great demons of the Abyss moved very quickly, disappearing in a flash. They didn't seem to have much strength, but in fact, their attacks had the power to break metal and stone. Even angels, behemoths, giant dragons, and other super races had been cut into pieces by the great demons. After about 10 minutes, the magic shield's color gradually faded, and it was almost transparent, which meant that the magic array was on the verge of collapse. Jedis sensed that something was wrong and immediately began to chant a spell. Waves of magic fluctuations shook violently with the chant, and a moment later, a bright light shone, and a gate of heaven appeared in the sky. Then, a giant angel of dozens of meters tall flew out of the gate of heaven, waving a lightsaber. Its body instantly turned into a strong stream of light and slammed down. Angel of Light's punishment. The great demons of the Abyss who were besieging the magic shield immediately scattered, and in a few flashes, they rushed to the periphery. Jedis knew that he could not kill the dozen or so great demons of the Abyss, but he could not watch the magic shield collapse, so he could only do his best and leave it to fate. Boom! The giant angel of light hit the place where the Hellhounds were the most concentrated, and a space of hundreds of meters was immediately swallowed by a bright white light. The ground and the walls of the Holy Crown City trembled violently, and then a strong shock wave swept out with the Angel of Light as the center. Countless Hellhounds and Minotaurs were rolled up high by the shock wave like pebbles and were thrown out of the city. The moment the giant Angel of Light appeared, a dark shadow appeared in the distance. Every time it flashed, the distance between it and the Holy Crown City was shortened by hundreds of meters. Judging by its speed, it would only take a few breaths of time to reach the Holy Crown City. The powerful shockwave swept through half of the battlefield, and at the place where the Angel of Light collided with the ground, there was already a deep crater tens of meters wide. The Hellhounds and Minotaurs that were lucky enough not to be swept away by the shockwave were also dizzy, completely forgetting their mission. The dark shadow had already flown past the big pit created by the Angel of Light and continued to approach the Holy Crown City. Jedis locked onto the dark shadow. Although the distance was too far for him to see the appearance of the other party, and he did not have the energy to release his X-ray eyes, he had a feeling that Prince Johnson finally could not help but appear. Jedis's breathing became very shallow. He was trying to catch the frequency of the other party's teleportation. At this time, the other demons were also approaching the Holy Crown City, but Jedis did not care about anything else. His primary goal was, of course, to kill Prince Johnson. Suddenly, a smile appeared on the corner of Jedis's mouth, and the next moment, he had already raised his scepter. The deep pit created by the angel of light suddenly lit up, as if a sun was rising from the pit. Golden rays of light, like countless steel needles, swept across the whole world in an instant. God's revelation. Zhonglin was famous throughout the continent for his unparalleled alchemy skills, and his fame seemed to be far greater than Deity's, who was of a similar status. In fact, it was because Jedis had been hiding his overlapping magic. Although the demon annihilation crossbow was sharp, it was after all an external object. However, the birth of overlapping magic could cause earth-shaking changes in the magic domain. Jedis understood the principle that a man's wealth was his own ruin. Of course, it was also because he was cautious enough that he had the opportunity to escape from Nicholas. Jedis' magic was beyond the expectations of all the abyssal demons, because no forbidden spell could be released without warning. The demons who were about to release their teleportation suddenly lost their coordinates, and the demons who had just crossed the space suddenly felt a stinging pain in their bodies, especially their eyes, which could no longer be opened. Countless hellhounds let out dying cries, and the hellhounds closer to the big pit were even pierced by thousands of rays of light, turning into broken skins. The smile on Jedis' face quickly turned into helplessness. What a good opportunity. Those great abyssal demons had lost the ability to teleport, and their eyes couldn't see anything. If the Holy Crown City had enough combat power, they could have killed a few of them. Unfortunately, the duration of God's revelation was only 7 or 8 breaths, and although those great abyssal demons were more or less injured, it didn't affect their combat power. Johnson, who had just approached the Holy Crown City, roared angrily, "Bastard!" If his plan had succeeded, the demon squad would have already started a massacre in the city. Even if there were a few more high priests like this, they wouldn't be able to withstand their siege. But now, they could only suffer outside the city. Johnson could no longer control his emotions. Although his eyes couldn't see anything, he slowly raised the scythe in his hand, and his pair of thick arms almost doubled in size. Then, the scythe emitted a dark light. The moment the effect of God's revelation disappeared, Johnson released his teleportation ability and appeared above Jedis, waving his scythe and chopping down with all his might. Not only were the two separated by a magic barrier, but they were also dozens of meters away. Johnson's scythe didn't seem to be able to hit Jedis at all, but as the scythe moved, a 100-meter-long crack appeared in the air, and the crack quickly spread downwards. From the front of the crack, it was almost impossible to see the crack that was thinner than paper, but from the side, Johnson's scythe created a dark curtain, as if it was going to split the world in half. Chapter 542. My Lord. At the moment when the curtain of darkness bloomed in the sky, Adonis had already rushed towards Jedis and knocked him away with his shoulder. The curtain fell very quickly, and the war spear in Adonis' hand was silently broken into 2 pieces. Fortunately, he had pulled back quickly. If he had been half a second late, he would have lost his right arm forever. A large piece of Jedis' fluttering robe was also cut off, and a magic enchantment of the Holy Crown City was also destroyed by Johnson's attack. The hellhounds and minotaurs let out deafening roars. Without the protection of the magic barrier, the walls of the Holy Crown City were nothing in front of a large group of mid-rank magical beasts and powerful minotaurs. In just a few breaths, countless hellhounds and minotaurs rushed up the walls. At this moment, nearly 1,000 meters above the Holy Crown City, 2 figures stood quietly in the clouds. The figure on the right was slender, and her loose black robe could not completely cover her graceful curves. 2 black wings of light extended from her shoulders, slanting towards the sky. Under the strong wind, her silver hair fluttered in the air like a fluttering flag. The figure on her right was much taller, and her whole body was wrapped in a dazzling milky white light. The only thing that could be seen clearly was the pair of unbelievably large white wings that stretched out behind her. The 2 figures stood opposite each other, one in light and one in dark, forming a strong visual conflict. If the high and mighty Archangel Alpha saw this scene, he would probably desperately descend to the human world. It was a great irony that the fallen angel and the archangel of light stood together so harmoniously. "What's the matter?" Catherine tilted her head and looked at the light opposite her. "Did I force you to do it for me again?" Lennon's low voice came from the light. "Not for you, but for us." Catherine looked up at the gray sky. "Alpha has racked his brains, but failed to achieve his goal. Do you think he will just ignore it? I just want to spend some time with you without being disturbed." Lennon's voice was still low and unmoved. "And then? We will meet the end of death together?" "No, Lennon, that's not what I want." Catherine stared at Lennon. "I will never let that happen again." Lennon was silent for a moment, and then said, "Catherine, promise me, if that day really comes, you must kill me first. I can feel that there is a very special power in the seal left by Alpha, and I don't want to become his tool again. If I could really do that." Catherine smiled faintly. "I wouldn't be who I am now." Lennon was speechless. Indeed, Catherine was right. If she could really harden her heart, then she definitely wouldn't be like this now. After a long time, Catherine's voice sounded, "That Raphael, can he really remove the seal completely? Even if he could, what reason was there for him to do it? I remember that he is not easy to persuade. That's why I'm here." Lennon looked down at the rolling clouds under his feet. Below the clouds, the whole Holy Crown city had turned into a bloody hell. The human soldiers were roaring and fighting with the hellhounds and the minotaurs. It was like a huge meat grinder. Every second, there would be people falling down and turning into flesh and blood flying everywhere. If the seal in my body is a lock, my intuition tells me that Raphael may be the only one who can hope to open it. Lennon slowly looked at Catherine. "Even if there's only a little chance, we can't give up, right? Besides, I promised him that if the Holy Crown City is attacked, I will help him. In fact, I also know that his target is not me, but you." "Well, maybe you are right, he really can," Catherine murmured. "Anyway, that Raphael is much more pleasing to the eye than these guys, but I want you to promise me one thing. Wait for me here, okay? Do you want me to hide under your shelter forever?" Lennon let out a soft laugh. "Then, I will always be a lamb. Although I have lost my body, I still have the soul of a man." Catherine was silent for a moment, then showed a sweet smile. Okay, as you wish." The two flew down side by side. After breaking through the thick clouds, they could clearly see the two sides fighting fiercely in the Holy Crown City. The hellhounds and minotaurs had already broken through the city wall. The two suddenly sped up and fell straight down like two dazzling meteors. Johnson's figure appeared beside a soldier of the Holy Crown City. With a casual swing of the scythe in his hand, the soldier's head flew into the sky, and the headless body staggered and fell to the ground. During the whole process, Johnson did not look at the soldier, but stared at Jedis, who was a few hundred meters away. Like Johnson, the other great demons of the abyss were also flashing around a few hundred meters away from Jedis, constantly reaping lives and looking for opportunities. Jedi's overlapping magic had left an indelible impression on all the great demons. Releasing two forbidden spells at the same time was something that had never been heard of before. Therefore, the great demons of the abyss were not sure if they could kill Jedis without suffering a backlash. But this situation would not last for long. As long as the minotaurs and hellhounds could reach Jedis, everything would be over. At this moment, a monstrous pressure suddenly spread out from the sky, enveloping the entire battlefield. Johnson looked up in surprise and saw Catherine rushing towards the ground at an incredible speed. At first, he was overjoyed, but then his eyes were immediately attracted by Lennon. "What is this? An angel? How did Catherine end up hanging out with an angel?" When Jedis and Guevara saw the two appear, they were a little surprised. Although Han Jin had promised that the angel would not become their enemy, it was hard to say the same for Catherine. There was no reason to reason with an existence that had lived for tens of thousands of years. When Catherine was about 100 meters away from the ground, she raised the long sword in her hand and slashed down from a distance. The tip of the sword was pointed in the direction of Prince Johnson. The speed of Catherine's attack could no longer be described with words. When she raised her sword and slashed down, a white sword light had already crossed the distance of nearly 100 meters and attacked Johnson. For a powerhouse at Johnson's level, it was almost impossible for him to be ambushed. His mind was like a clear lake, and all external traces would leave a projection in his mind. Even if he was silently locked on, he would immediately feel pressure. At the same time Catherine raised her lightsaber, his figure had already disappeared from where he stood. An incomparably sharp sword light crossed the space of 100 meters, pierced through the afterimage he left behind, and struck the ground. With a loud boom, the sword light drew out a trench that was dozens of meters long and 3 meters wide on the ground. As if she had already known that her attack would fail, Catherine spread her wings and held her lightsaber horizontally in front of her chest. When Johnson's figure had just reappeared in another place, Catherine had already shot out like lightning. The longsword in her hand swept out horizontally and chopped towards Johnson's chest. This time, she did not release any sword light. Although many powerhouses who stood at the top of the world acknowledged Catherine's strength, including the arrogant Black Dragon King Valentine, Donald, who had the inheritance of the god of death, and the unfathomable Han Jin, Catherine was very clear that without the qualification to release light magic, her combat power had been greatly weakened. She could not quickly catch those flashing great demons of the abyss. Therefore, she immediately targeted Johnson when she joined the battle. As long as Johnson was in danger, the great demons of the abyss would not abandon their prince and would definitely besiege her. In this way, she would have solved the biggest headache for the Holy Crown City. Johnson roared and swung his scythe with all his might to resist the thunderous sword strike. With a loud bang, as if an iron hammer had hit everyone's heart, a shockwave visible to the naked eye spread out in all directions with the two as the center. The huge airwave set off smoke and dust all over the sky. Sand and pebbles were flying in the air. Johnson's figure flew up like a kite with a broken string and then disappeared. His old injury had not healed yet, and now he had to resist the sword strike of the fallen angel, which could be regarded as an injury on top of an injury. When he reappeared, blood was oozing out from the corner of his mouth, and the wound on his chest had also cracked. "Your Highness!" Two great demons of the abyss appeared beside Johnson and caught his body. The rest of the great demons of the abyss roared and flashed around Catherine one after another. Their pitch-black scythes whizzed towards Catherine. The sword in Catherine's hand flashed repeatedly, blocking all the scythes that were attacking her. Her figure did not stop at all as she charged straight toward Johnson. The great demons of the abyss turned pale with fright and attacked even faster. 7 or 8 great demons of the abyss flew up and down around Catherine, their figures flickering in and out of sight. Their blades whistled as they attacked Catherine from all angles. But in the end, not a single blade was able to land on Catherine. They could only gradually slow her down. "Are you crazy?" Johnson roared angrily as he glared at Catherine with bloodshot eyes. "Perhaps," Catherine responded casually, but the speed of her sword became faster. Her figure was also slowly approaching Johnson. Judging from her posture, it seemed that she was eyeing Johnson. "Do you know what you're doing? You are making an enemy of the entire abyss." Johnson roared loudly, but his words fully exposed his inner uneasiness. "So what?" Catherine's indifferent tone made Johnson fly into a rage. He violently pushed away the two great demons supporting him and slowly raised the scythe in his hand. His breathing gradually became heavy. "Your Highness!" The two great demons of the abyss couldn't help but exclaim at the same time when they saw Johnson's actions. With Johnson's current physical condition, it was simply not enough for him to activate the secret skill of the god of death's inheritance again. "Get out of my way!" Johnson roared. His figure instantly swelled several times, and thick veins on his swollen muscles kept throbbing. Johnson knew very well that in this situation, if he didn't take advantage of the fact that Catherine was entangled to get rid of this super powerful fighting force, then he and his subordinates would probably have to stay here forever. Of course, there was another way, and that was to immediately retreat. But the pride of the great demons of the abyss made Johnson not want to escape again. Nicola's sword strike that almost killed him not only left him with a wound that was difficult to heal, but also a deep disgrace. The two great demons of the abyss saw Johnson's insistence, and after exchanging glances, they both rushed towards Catherine. They couldn't let His Highness, the prince's blood flow in vain. Due to the sudden acceleration of Catherine's attack, Lennon was left far behind by her. At this time, he finally caught up. After seeing the scene on the field, he immediately threw the lightsaber in his hand at Johnson, who was ready to attack in the distance. An abyssal great demon appeared in the air and welcomed the light sword with his scythe. The light sword was sent flying without any suspense. That great demon sneered, courting death. Then he wanted to use instant transmission again to teleport to Lennon's side and kill this overconfident angel. After Lennon threw out the lightsaber, he no longer looked at the result. Instead, he knelt down on one knee, and the white wings on his back instantly expanded, extending hundreds of meters. When the wings extended to the limit, a low voice came from Lennon's mouth. Purify. As soon as Lennon's voice fell, the light wings covering an area of several hundred meters turned into countless starlight, splashing in all directions. For a moment, the sky was filled with these milky white light spots flying everywhere, as if countless little fairies were playing. Suddenly, a white light bloomed above the Holy Crown city. It was condensed but not extinguished. It hovered in the air like a huge round mirror. The next moment, a fully armed soldier came out of the round mirror and fell down vertically. Although the soldiers couldn't see the soldier's face, they cheered and their morale soared when they saw the flapping red cloak. Immediately afterward, a bright red flame shot out from the round mirror. It let out a high-pitched cry as it shot into the distance. It was Yelena. The baby had become a beautiful scenery in the Holy Crown city. Of course, the soldiers could recognize the familiar high-pitched sound of the baby. After a few seconds, another tall figure jumped out of the round mirror and fell straight to the ground. The soldiers below hurriedly made way for him. Asterisk boom. Asterisk Dominguez landed on the ground. Her feet broke through the stone floor and sank several feet into the ground. However, this inertia did not affect her at all. Her silver eyes stared coldly at the incoming hellhounds. One after another, tall figures came out of the mirror. Some fell on the street, and some directly smashed into the houses on both sides. The Titans under Domini's command all came to support. No, one was missing. Jennifer didn't appear. Otherwise, when the Titans fell from the sky, they would have at least heard a shrill scream. Two of you come with me. The rest of you go to support other places. Domini gave a brief order. Then, she waved her right arm, and a war spear completely made of electric elements appeared in her hand. Winston's first swordsman legion was fighting the hellhounds in front of Dominique. After experiencing several bloody battles, the swordsmen could be considered experienced warriors. Seeing Dominique leading the Titans to support them, they immediately retreated into the houses on both sides and made way for the main road in the middle. Dominique waved her spear and crashed straight into the hellhounds that were pouncing at her. The Holy Crown City was a human city. When drawing and even building the streets, of course, it had to be based on human standards. Domini's arms were long, and the war spear in her hand was almost 4 meters long. The white light emitted from the spear almost blocked the whole street. Every time she waved her spear, several or even a dozen hellhounds would be smashed into pieces of flesh and blood. The minotaurs that occasionally appeared couldn't resist Domini's attack. They were either blown away like broken leaves or fell to the ground softly. It was said that one man could hold the pass against 10,000 enemies. However, Domini was the one who broke through the pass. She actually went against the tide of hellhounds, stepping on the flesh and blood on the ground. The arrogant minotaurs and hellhounds were just a bunch of chickens and pottery dogs at her eyes. No one could slow her down. The only task of the two titans behind Domini was to kill the survivors who were in the blind spots of Domini's attack. The end of heaven and earth, the combination of yin and yang. Han Jin's clear voice sounded. His voice wasn't loud, but somehow It could clearly reach the ears of every living creature, including humans, titans, abyssal demons, hellhounds, and minotaurs. Not only did they hear it clearly, but they also felt that the whole world was trembling in this voice. Han Jin's incantation was coming to an end. My will is to destroy evil. Suppress. Along with Han Jin's chanting, the 128 stone pillars that had been buried deep underground began to emit dazzling light at the same time. The light ignored the cover of the earth and shot straight up into the sky, forming pillars of light. However, the colors of the pillars were somewhat different. The 64 yang lines were white with a hint of bright gold, while the 64 yin lines were light green with wisps of black gas. Then, a thunderclap that could penetrate into the depths of one's soul suddenly exploded. In the invisible sound waves, the hellhounds outside the Holy Crown City collapsed in large numbers, which formed a sharp contrast with the hellhounds inside the city that were still roaring and attacking. The yin-yang formation set by Han Jin was a fierce and deadly formation. Once it was activated, it would even be out of his control. Moreover, the formation itself couldn't distinguish between friend and foe. For the sake of the people in the city, he could only set the entire Holy Crown City as the eye of the formation, so that the people in the eye of the formation wouldn't be affected too much. In the words of this world, the suppress formula was a kind of spiritual attack, but its power was far more powerful than any spiritual magic in a magic system. The weak might be killed on the spot, while the strong would also be greatly affected. Catherine, who was ready to receive Johnson's attack, showed a confused look in her eyes. The wings behind her stopped fluttering, and she seemed to have turned into a painting. Johnson, whose muscles were bulging, also remained motionless. His memory was blank. He had forgotten who he was and what he was going to do. Even if he could recover at this moment, his mind was severely shaken and he couldn't control his body. Chapter 543. As soon as the roar of heaven and earth ended, Baby quickly spread its wings and shot out of the eye of the yin-yang explosion-killing formation. The next moment, Yelena had already raised the Mjolnir in her hand. 2 crimson lightning bolts shot out and hit the 2 abyss great demons who were standing still. Boom! Boom! The sharp lightning bolts penetrated the bodies of the 2 great demons of the abyss and bombarded the ground obliquely, splashing plasma like the surface of the sea. If Grand Duke Solomon was here, he would definitely be dumbfounded. The appearance of the plasma meant that Yelena was close to the realm of elemental materialization. Then, she would face the final obstacle of the strong, the ultimate barrier. Once she broke through, she would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with demigod masters, such as Han Jin, Nicholas, and Adolf. Even if she didn't break through, she would still be qualified to stand proudly at the top of the world. Han Jin's figure flashed several times and quietly appeared beside Prince Johnson. He waved the long sword in his hand and slashed at Prince Johnson's neck like lightning. At this moment, Catherine's body suddenly trembled. She finally regained her freedom. After all, she was a high and mighty cherub, and her spiritual power had been tempered thousands of times. Although Han Jin's yin-yang multiplication formation was extremely powerful, it could only control Catherine for a few seconds. However, waking up didn't feel good. Catherine felt as if she had been in a nightmare for 1,000 years. Her battle robe was soaked in cold sweat. If I were fighting with Han Jin, what would the result be? It goes without saying. She was stunned for a few seconds. Even a 10th grade professional, who was similar to an ant in her eyes, could cause fatal damage to her, let alone Han Jin. The next moment, Catherine suddenly saw a purple streamer wrapped in supreme power rolling toward Prince Johnson's neck. Catherine's eyes were filled with horror, and she anxiously shouted, "Don't kill him." Unfortunately, Han Jin couldn't withdraw his sword, let alone Catherine. When the first word of no came out, Han Jin's sword had already swept across Prince Johnson's neck. A huge head flew up in the splashing blood, and the next few words became meaningless wails. Han Jin's figure flashed again, and he appeared beside another great abyss demon. He flipped his hand, and a stream of light lightly swept across the great Abyss Demon's chest. The great Abyss Demon's arms and body were cut into two. Han Jin didn't use his full strength this time. He heard Catherine's cry, and he didn't need to be too nervous when dealing with an Abyss Demon whose soul had been shocked and was like a walking corpse. More importantly, Catherine came to the rescue of the Holy Crown City, which greatly changed Han Jin's impression of Catherine. No matter how important Catherine's role was, she came, which proved her attitude. Therefore, Han Jin had to pay attention to Catherine's opinion. While waving the knife, Han Jin glanced at Catherine from the corner of his eyes. "What do you mean by that?" Then he released the ground-shrinking spell again. Han Jin slowed down, but Yelena moved faster and faster. Bolts of lightning shot out from her hammer of Mjolnir, accurately hitting one Abyss Great Demon after another. Now was the perfect time to hit them while they were down. What else was she waiting for? Was she waiting for them to regain their freedom? The situation in front of her changed so drastically that Catherine didn't know how to react. After being stunned for a while, Catherine suddenly screamed hysterically, "Destroy him! Completely destroy him! Hurry up!" Before she finished speaking, a sword light that was several hundred meters long shot out from Catherine's hand. Unlike before, the sword light that was released this time continued to expand as it flew out, and it also let out a thunderous whistling sound. There was nothing strange about a warrior brandishing a sword that was over a meter long. However, if a wasp brandished a sword that was countless times larger than itself, there was no doubt that it would bring about a strong sense of shock. At this moment, Catherine was like this. Her figure had been completely engulfed by the flashing sword radiance. Boom! The sword light hit the ground where Prince Johnson fell, and a white semicircular curtain of light about a few meters wide appeared. Then, the curtain of light spread out at an extremely fast speed, sweeping across hundreds of meters in the blink of an eye. Countless bodies of hellhounds and minotaurs were swept up by the curtain of light, and sand and stones of various sizes formed a circular tide of flesh and blood. The tip of the wave was even more than 10 meters high, and it surged in all directions with great momentum. The tide of flesh and blood in the distance was nothing special. As the distance increased, the tip of the wave became lower and lower, and finally turned into a rain of stones. However, the tide of flesh and blood in the direction of the Holy Crown City caused a shocking effect. In just a moment, the incalculable weight of the tide of flesh and blood hit the nearly 1,000-meter-long city wall, dyeing the whole section of the wall red. From east to west, hundreds of cracks of different lengths and sizes appeared on the wall. When Dismark repaired the city wall, he had purchased a large amount of magic adamantine from isolated Cliff City. But in the face of the tide of flesh and blood, the magic adamantine was so fragile that it couldn't even withstand a single blow. It wasn't that the alchemists of isolated Cliff City cut corners. They wouldn't do business only once. They were willing to abide by their own morals and the rules of this profession. It was all because Catherine's full power strike was too terrifying. Han Jin's figure had already appeared in the air. As strong as he was, he had to dodge temporarily. Meanwhile, Baby let out a dissatisfied cry and hovered above Han Jin. After the shock wave dissipated, a deep pit hundreds of meters wide appeared below. Coincidentally, the pit created by Jiddy's Angel of Light was nearby. Comparing the two, the winner was obvious. If the pit created by Jedis was like a big bowl, then the pit created by Catherine was like a wooden barrel. Including Prince Johnson, Han Jin had killed a total of 3 great demons of the Abyss, and Yelena had killed 7 or 8. However, now all the great demons of the Abyss had disappeared. There was nothing in the deep pit except for the messy sand and mud. It was estimated that Prince Johnson's body had been crushed into pieces that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. Was this Catherine's real strength? Han Jin slowly let out a sigh of relief. He was still a little scared. If Catherine had attacked him like this when they met for the first time, his dreams and everything he cherished would have all gone up in smoke. Strangely, Catherine was still holding her lightsaber and staring down without blinking. Her body was tense, and her expression was particularly serious. At this moment, she was not in the mood to warn Han Jin about what might happen. Every abyss demon that had the ability to communicate with death god Hamas had a certain chance of triggering a terrifying skill called Death's Blessing. In other words, the death of that abyss demon had attracted the attention of death god Hamas. Once death god Hamas turned his attention to this bit wall, that abyss demon's body would become an avatar of death. Of course, that was not the real death god's avatar. Its combat power was much weaker, and its duration was very short. However, even with such an existence, Catherine knew that she could not deal with it, and even Alpha, the most powerful being in this bit wall, could only avoid it temporarily. No matter how short the time was, it was enough for Death's avatar to kill Catherine, Lenin, Han Jin, and all the powerful beings in the Holy Crown City. Finally, it would destroy the Holy Crown City. Of course, the probability of the Grim Reaper's favor activating was very, very low. After the era of the gods, the Grim Reaper's clone had only appeared 2 or 3 times, and the great demons who possessed the Grim Reaper's inheritance had disappeared in the long river of time. But Catherine had a feeling that she would soon witness a terrifying scene with her own eyes. "Lady Catherine," Han Jin called her softly. Although he did not know why Catherine was so nervous, he also felt his heart sink. He even forgot to support the Holy Crown City, which was still in the middle of a chaotic battle. Catherine seemed to have heard nothing. She was still staring at the deep pit. Han Jin's body suddenly swayed. With the help of the yin and yang expanse killing formation, his divine thoughts had become one with the land. His senses were extremely sharp. Something seemed to be coming from a place far, far away. In other words, it was something that did not belong to this world. It was trying to squeeze in and seep in, making him feel a kind of suffocating pressure. In Han Jin's sight, wisps of black gas floated up around the deep pit. The black gas condensed in the same place, and then evolved into a faint figure. The figure was somewhat similar to Prince Johnson. The only difference was that it had no weapon in its hand, and its eyes were tightly closed. Catherine took a long breath, as if she was convulsing. She slowly raised the lightsaber in her hand. Her movements were very slow, as if what she was waving was not a lightsaber, but a mountain that could not bear the burden. The figure opened his eyes little by little. He was the first to look at Han Jin. Han Jin's heart suddenly contracted, and he felt a sharp pain, as if his heart had just been pierced by a sharp steel needle. It was a feeling of coldness all over his body. He did not even dare to look into the figure's eyes, and subconsciously avoided it. Immediately, a ball of heat surged into his mind. Han Jin felt extremely angry. Although he subconsciously avoided it, he could not forgive himself for his cowardice. In this place, he was the real master. There was nothing that he could not face, and nothing that he could not defeat. The next moment, Han Jin immediately turned his eyes and coldly stared at the figure. A fiery fighting spirit was boiling in his chest. Catherine let out a high-pitched shriek. Her entire body was trembling nonstop. It was not because she was afraid, but because she was accumulating all her strength. Perhaps it was because he subconsciously became timid after capturing Han Jin, but the figure had already let go of Han Jin. His gaze turned to Catherine, who was as tense as a bowstring. His gaze was filled with disdain, giving off a very strange feeling. It was as if a cat was teasing a dying mouse. Catherine finally reached her limit. She swung her long sword down, and the dense sword light seemed to have an indescribable suction force. As the sword light flashed, it was as if the entire sky was torn down. The sword light was wrapped in the sword light, and it came crashing down on the figure's head with the force of Mount Tai. The power of this strike was obviously stronger than the previous one. Han Jin immediately released the earth-shrinking spell and reappeared in the distance, while Baby spun rapidly and shot into the sky. Adolphe, who had just stepped onto the city wall from the teleportation matrix a moment ago, narrowed his eyes to the size of a needle. He recognized Catherine, the fallen angel, and what kind of existence the figure was. Boom! The earth trembled violently like a sieve, and the sand and dust splashed up to hundreds of meters high, as if an invisible volcano had suddenly erupted below. Then, a circle of shock wave, which could be clearly seen by the naked eye, spread rapidly from the point of impact. Boom! Boom! Hundreds of meters away, the city wall of the Holy Crown City, which had been riddled with holes, could no longer bear the impact. Several parts of the wall began to collapse, and one of them was right under Adolf's feet. Adolf jumped up first and shot forward. However, his efforts were in vain. If he slowed down Adolf's movement, he would find that Adolf's speed was getting slower and slower. Finally, he stopped in the air and floated backward under the impact of the shock wave. He landed in the Holy Crown City, which was about 70 or 80 meters away from the city wall. The shock wave that poured in from the gap in the city wall continued to move forward and destroyed many houses near the city wall. Fortunately, when the battle had just broken out, Guevara had ordered all the residents near the city wall to evacuate to the inner area. Otherwise, thousands of people would have been killed by Catherine. Of course, Adolf was unscathed. As soon as he landed, he started to move again. He rushed out of the smoke and dust, stepped on the broken bricks and tiles, and flew forward quickly. Adolf would never flinch, even if he was covered with cuts and bruises, let alone being unscathed. His whole life was for today's fated battle. He had been waiting for this moment, and now he had blossomed. Then, he would have no regrets in this life. The huge pit that Catherine had just left behind expanded to nearly 100 meters in diameter, leaving behind a pitch-black hole. The bottom could not even be seen. It was as if a god was playing a joke on the ants and mortals, using an unimaginably huge stick to ruthlessly poke the ground. The figure had been smashed by Catherine's sword, but he didn't disappear. Under the gaze of Han Jean and Catherine, traces of black gas appeared again and condensed into a human figure. Then, the figure slowly opened his eyes again and looked at Catherine quietly. There was no malevolence, no viciousness, no cruelty, and no superfluous changes. It was as though he lacked the characteristics of dark creatures that people imagined him to be. He was exceptionally quiet. After a few breaths, the figure smiled at Catherine. On the surface, his smile was very normal, but it made people feel a kind of evil that invaded the depths of their souls. Catherine's eyes were filled with despair and unwillingness. Light magic was the best and most effective way to deal with the abyssal demons or even more powerful dark creatures. Unfortunately, she had lost the ability to release light magic. She couldn't stop the other party at all with only physical attacks. The next moment, Adolf, who rushed out of the smoke and dust, made up for Catherine's regret. Without chanting a spell, Adolf waved his arm, and a pure white light suddenly appeared, enveloping the world. Adolf's attack seemed to be out of the figure's expectations. He was stunned, then looked up at the sky and let out a silent roar. Adolf waved his arm again, and another pure light curtain fell from the sky, enveloping the figure and Catherine. Although Han Jean had given him a forewarning that Catherine might give up the dark faction and convert to the heavenly realm again, both the Great Blessing spell and the Great Prayer spell were large-scale magic, and he couldn't control them. Then, Adolf waved his arm for the third time, and a rapidly spinning light ball shot out and blasted toward the figure. The figure's shape became a little dazed, and it could be seen that he was in pain. Boom! The holy light ball thrown by Adolf hit the figure, and the figure trembled. The holy light ball exploded and turned into streaks of flowing light like electric arcs, flashing on the figure's body. The figure looked up at the sky again. Although no one could hear his cry, it could be sensed that the figure was angry and was trying to release his power. All of a sudden, numerous black smoke appeared on the battlefield. It was peeled off from the Hellhounds' corpses and floated out from the dead Minotaurs' bodies. Even the dead soldiers of the Holy Crown City couldn't avoid it. In the blink of an eye, the black smoke condensed into a black fog, gathering in the center from all directions. As the black smoke poured in and merged, the gradually dim figure became clear again, and the brilliance formed by the Great Blessing spell and the Great Prayer spell faded quickly. In comparison, Catherine was much more miserable. She was also affected by the great blessing spell and the great prayer spell, and the unbearable pain made her delicate and beautiful facial features scrunch up. Adolf continued to fly forward, and the holy light balls almost formed a line in the air, shooting toward the figure one after another. The effects of the great blessing spell and the great prayer spell were quickly disappearing. Although he was anxious, he couldn't be reckless. Strength must be released in the most appropriate way at the most appropriate time. If he didn't know this, he would have lived in vain. "Raphael, what are you doing?" Catherine endured the pain and screamed. Now is the most vulnerable time for him. "Hurry up. This is a battlefield. He will soon. Hurry up." At this moment, Catherine had consumed a lot of her strength, and she was also affected by the great blessing spell and the great prayer spell. She could only place her hopes on a human. Han Jin turned a deaf ear to her. His eyes were slightly closed, and he was still slowly forming hand seals. He wasn't much stronger than Catherine, and operating the yin-yang amplification killing formation consumed too much energy. In fact, there was no need for further analysis. Just by looking at Catherine's nervousness, Han Jin already knew that the enemy that appeared had unimaginable power. It wasn't that he wasn't anxious, but that he couldn't be anxious. Suddenly, a dazzling light came from the sky, and a gate of heaven slowly opened. Then, a huge angel of light swooped down, waving a sword of light, and rushed toward the figure. The pale-faced Jedis stood on the city wall. Without the command of the great demon of the abyss, and without backup, the hellhounds and minotaurs that rushed into the Holy Crown City were almost annihilated. "Raphael!" Catherine screamed again. Her voice was a bit more mournful. Adolf couldn't do it, and Jedis couldn't do it either. If she really wanted to defeat the Avatar of Death, she could only rely on the young man who had repeatedly surprised her. Chapter 544. Boom! The angel of light that Jeds had summoned with all his remaining strength swooped down and slammed into the ground. Then, with a deafening boom, it turned into countless specks of light and disappeared. When the specks of light dissipated, the figure seemed to have suffered some damage and became somewhat blurry. However, with the help of the black gas, it quickly returned to its original state. Jedis felt his throat dry and sore. Light-based magic had a great advantage against abyssal creatures, but even in this situation, he couldn't cause any damage to the other party. The light-based forbidden spell he was so proud of had become a mere decoration. What else could it do? Moreover, he didn't have the ability to release another forbidden spell. Those who had participated in the Battle of the Freedom Federation were also dumbfounded. Wasn't this another monster that couldn't be killed? The only difference was that the Flame Tyrant had to rely on low-level fire spirits to create a lava barrier for him, while the figure in front of them could collect all the corpses on the battlefield for his own use. The difference between them was obvious. Han Jin's hand gestures became more and more strenuous, and a fine layer of sweat seeped out of his forehead. This yin-yang amplification killing formation was so huge that even if he wanted to control it, he would need to use all of his vital energy. Time. What Han Jin needed the most right now was time. Just a little while more, and he would be able to activate the formation. When that time came, Han Jin was completely confident that he would be able to consign the monster in front of him to eternal damnation. The question was, would the figure give him that much time? Although the figure hadn't made a move since the beginning, no one thought that he would just stand there like an idiot. At this moment, Adolf was getting closer and closer to the figure. The bullets of holy light in his hands poured down on the figure like a torrential storm. However, they only caused ripples on the figure's body and didn't cause any substantial damage. Lenin's figure descended from the sky and saw Catherine's pained expression. He couldn't help but pause for a moment before turning his gaze to the black figure in the middle of the battlefield. Perhaps it was because of his innate disgust for dark creatures, or perhaps it was because of Catherine, but Lenin roared and pounced straight at the figure. Lenin wanted to maintain his current form. He needed pure mental energy, and that figure was clearly formed from mental energy. However, after absorbing the death aura on the battlefield, it became a little strange. In that case, the deciding factor between them would be the strength of their mental strength. As it turned out, that figure's mental strength was far greater than what others had imagined. Just as Lennon roared and charged forward, the figure finally moved. He opened his hands, and the world suddenly darkened. Countless chain-like things shot out, shooting toward everyone nearby. Even the ordinary soldiers standing on the city wall were affected. This was utter contempt. That person's actions fully explained his mentality. In his eyes, there seemed to be no difference whether it was the fallen angel Catherine or an ordinary soldier who had only reached the level of a beginner warrior. They were all just fresh lives. However, no one dared to laugh at that person for overestimating himself. Catherine's attitude had already made everything clear. This was a powerful existence that made even the fallen angel extremely nervous. No one dared to ignore the chain that was shooting toward them. When they got closer, everyone realized that the chain was made up of twisted willow, leaf-like objects. Each leaf was not connected to each other. They were connected by some dense black fog. No one was willing to let such a strange thing touch them. They all dodged to the side. However, the black chain seemed to have a life of its own. It followed their movements and adjusted its direction at any time. It chased after its target like a maggot attached to a bone. The others didn't know what these chains were, but Catherine knew very well. Her face immediately turned pale, and she screamed, "Dodge! It's the soul chain." The first to be attacked was Adolf. As the distance was too close, Adolf couldn't avoid it. He roared and punched the tip of the chain. Unexpectedly, the front half of the chain was smashed into pieces by Adolf's hasty punch. Countless leaves fluttered in the air. Adolf couldn't help but be startled by this scene. Everyone thought that the monster's attack would be thunderous. No one expected it to be so fragile. The fluttering willow leaves only paused for a moment in the air before collapsing inwards. They kept spinning around Adolf's body and firmly wrapped him in it. The other end of the chain was connected to the hand of the figure. It looked like a person was waving an extremely long meteor hammer. The same scene happened to everyone one after another. No matter if they were dodging or counterattacking, they were all surrounded by the fluttering leaves without exception. The one who lasted the longest was naturally Catherine. Although she was heavily injured in terms of speed, even Han Jin couldn't compare with her. However, no matter how fast she moved, the chain always followed her like a shadow. Although Catherine wouldn't be attacked for a while, she was powerless to fight back. Baby instinctively felt fear. Although it was still young and couldn't compare to Catherine in speed, Catherine was a tenacious warrior after all. In this situation, she wouldn't run away no matter what. Baby didn't care so much. It desperately flapped its wings and fled into the distance. It was really frightened. In just a few breaths of time, Baby flew thousands of meters away. However, the strange chain still followed behind Baby. It seemed to be expressing a kind of will. Even if Baby escaped to the ends of the earth, it would still chase after it. At this moment, Han Jin's speed of making gestures could be described as a turtle's speed. Even moving a finger was strenuous for him. He didn't have the spare energy to avoid the attack of the chain. Unsurprisingly, he was firmly entangled by the leaves in the sky. The people who were wrapped in the chain were trying their best to break free. However, no matter what direction they chose or what kind of power they released, they couldn't break free from the chain. However, this wasn't the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that everyone felt that their vitality was rapidly draining away. The soul chain was a kind of legendary magic that only existed in the Age of Gods. It was said that once one was locked by the soul chain, there could only be one ending, and that was to return to the embrace of the Grim Reaper. Even if one had the power to break through the laws and escape to other planes, they wouldn't be able to break free. Lennon was also rushing left and right in the entanglement of these leaves. The only difference was that while others were draining their vitality, Lennon was losing the mental strength that made up his entire body. In an instant, Lennon's body shrank by several sizes. The milky white light that was so dense that it was almost solid gradually thinned, so much so that people could see his painful face clearly. Lennon. Catherine's heart felt like it was being twisted by a knife. She wished she could rush over and bear all the pain for Lennon. However, the chain chasing after her made it impossible for her to make any extra movements. She could only keep dodging. The scene in the field was very strange. The originally faint figure had now become incomparably dark. The end of each chain shot out from his hand was connected to a rolling spherical object. If one looked carefully, one could see that there was something flowing quickly in the leaves that formed the chain. The figure was still expressionless, as if he had just done something insignificant. Catherine was still dodging, the cold light in her eyes flashing crazily. She was overjoyed to find her lover, but in the blink of an eye, she was sent to hell again. She couldn't bear the pain of watching her lover die in front of her again. However, what was even more painful was that as a fallen angel, she couldn't do anything about everything that was happening in front of her. Raphael. Catherine's voice was almost hoarse. Han Jin had become her only hope. If even Han Jin couldn't do anything, then she only had one last choice left. Now, if something that did not belong to this plane forcefully left a projection in this world, it would also be restricted by the laws. After Prince Johnson's death, the clone of the god of death released the terrifying soul chains after absorbing some power. Therefore, he was now even weaker than when his projection had first appeared. If he wanted to defeat the clone of the god of death, now was the best chance. However, the sphere wrapped around Han Jin did not respond at all. Adolphe, the last person who might be able to do something, was also trapped by the soul chains. Catherine could hear Adolphe's angry roar and see the white light that penetrated the chains and scattered. Perhaps Adolphe could really use the power of light magic to shatter the chains, but it would be too late by the time he rushed out. Countless chains were transmitting soul power. In a few minutes, the figure would become the death clone with 100% combat power. Catherine was finally in despair. Since life and death were already determined, she might as well go all out. As for Weather Lennon, who had witnessed everything, would seize the opportunity to escape as she hoped, that was no longer within the scope of Catherine's consideration. At this moment, a voice came from the sphere wrapped around Han Jin. Dense primordial light, great spirits surging, heaven rising and earth descending, the sun rising and the darkness hiding. Although Han Jin's voice was very weak, there was a kind of firmness and unshakable feeling in his tone. My will is evil. Open. Suddenly, the holy crown city became bright. Then, tens of thousands of rays of light rose from the city like innumerable giant swords, piercing through the sky in an instant. The haze caused by the soul chains was swept away. The world of heaven and earth became completely different in the blink of an eye. Innumerable rays of light rushed into everything within sight. Dazzling flames jumped on the brick ruins, floated in the sky, played among the trees, and touched people's bodies, filling every corner. Under the shroud of the light, the scenery changed drastically. The trees, bushes, and even the ants crawling on the ground, as well as the ruins left behind by the collapse of the city walls, all became exquisite and translucent, as if they were all made of gems and crystals. This was no longer the world that people were familiar with. Even the legendary heaven would not be so beautiful. Han Jin spent several months to set up the yin-yang amplification killing formation, and finally, it released all its power. Pure yang meant that yin would not grow. Pure yin meant that yang would not rise. Han Jin released the pure yang incantation. Within the range of the formation, even if there were millions of yin spirits, they would be destroyed by the formation in an instant. The dazzling flames were everywhere and finally connected into a vast ocean. The countless soul chains were quickly breaking, disintegrating, and shattering under the impact of the flames. Soon, the figures of Adolphe, Lennon, Jedis, and Domini, the Titans, were revealed from the encirclement of the soul chains. However, when they saw this incomparably dazzling world, they were all stunned. Of course, with their calmness, They were not surprised by the beauty of the flames. Instead, it was because they vaguely felt a pressure, as if there were countless invisible eyes in the world staring at them or warning them. Moreover, those gazes seemed to be able to penetrate their bodies and their hearts. No one reminded them, but they just knew that once they did anything, it might cause the entire world to retaliate. Not to mention others, even Adolf, with his strength, did not dare to move. He just stared blankly at the dazzling sky. The figure let out a painful howl under the impact of the flames, breaking the short silence. His body had become solid, and he could really make sound. Like a huge meteorite falling into the sea, the flames, which had been quiet a moment ago, began to boil with the howl of the figure. Countless rays of light fell from the sky, rose from the ground, and pressed in from all directions. The figure staggered forward, but his posture was very strange. He was like a child who had just learned how to walk. He was stumbling and could fall at any moment. This was probably a subconscious reaction. Han Jin's yin-yang amplification killing formation had turned into a boundless sea of light. With his speed, he might not be able to escape even if he ran for an hour. No matter where the figure ran to, he was always the center of thousands of rays of light. His body was constantly cracking, but he seemed to have no muscles or bones. From the cracks in his skin, one could only see a bottomless darkness. Han Jin slowly raised his long saber and stared at the battered figure. No yin spirit could survive in the pure yang great formation. If it was Harley, he might have been turned into ashes in an instant. The fact that that guy could last until now was already beyond his expectations. In the next moment, Han Jin released the ground shrinking spell and appeared beside the figure. Han Jin shouted softly, "Evil Slayer." As he shouted, Han Jin waved his long saber and slashed at the figure's chest like lightning. Based on Han Jin's current experience, he wouldn't normally shout, which would only serve as a warning to the enemy. However, his shout could activate the power of the pure yang formation, as evidenced by the long saber that was shining with multicolored light. The figure seemed to be unable to see or hear anything. He was still running forward in a daze. It seemed that his vision and hearing did not come from here, but from another unreachable place. Perhaps the pure yang great formation released by Han Jin had cut off all the links. Or perhaps, even with the power of Death God Hamas, he could not see through this vast expanse of light. Boom! Han Jin's long saber slashed the figure's chest. The figure let out a mournful howl again. His body flew back more than 100 meters like a cannonball and crashed heavily on the ground. The long saber left a wound that was several inches deep on his chest. However, he did not seem to care about this injury and immediately struggled to get up. A cold light flashed in Han Jin's eyes. The heavenly axiom could cut off the abyss demon's scythe, but it could not cut through the figure's body. This made him feel incredulous. Vanquish evil. Han Jin appeared beside the figure again. The long saber in his hand fell mercilessly on the figure's neck. The figure had just gotten up when he was sent flying like a stiff stick. There was a deep wound on his neck, but there was no blood. Only black gas kept spewing out as if something was burning. Han Jin's third strike landed on the figure's cheek. The wound extended from the left side of his forehead to the right side of his cheek. Vanquish evil. At this time, Adolf and the others were used to the pressure of the Great Formation. They knew that this was a magic formation set up by Han Jin and would not hurt them. Jedis tried to cast a levitation spell. Seeing that his magic was not affected, he flew directly to the battle and landed beside Adolf. Jedis, this is their battle. Don't interfere with them, Adolf said softly. Jedis almost laughed out loud. Now that everyone could see that Han Jin had the upper hand, of course there was no need to help him. At the beginning, you were yelling and rushing to the front. Have you forgotten in the blink of an eye? I don't know how long Lord Raphael's magic formation can last. Jedis deliberately stopped talking. You don't understand, Adolf said faintly. He did not want to pay attention to Jedis. The twilight battle had already begun. This was a battle of life and death between the houses of gods. Of course, Adolf, who had victory in sight, had the leisure to think about the meaning of the battle. If the punching bag was Han Jin, he would not have cared so much. Vanquish evil! Vanquish evil! Han Jin's shouts became louder and louder. They even had the aura of breaking mountains and rivers. Every time he shouted, the air would vibrate endlessly, as if it was resonating with the whole world. Before the shouts ended, the shouts would be heard again. The figure was blasted away again and again. There were dozens of deep wounds on his body, especially his neck, which was almost two-thirds cut open. Han Jin's continuous attacks hit the same wound. If the figure had not instinctively protected his neck with his arms, his head would have been chopped off. Han Jin took a deep breath. This time, he did not use teleport. Instead, he slowly walked towards his opponent. At this moment, his whole body was covered in a multicolored light, as if he was a heavenly general who had walked out of a fairyland. The figure still did not notice Han Jin's existence. He raised his hands by his ears, bent his waist, and staggered forward. But he did not know that Han Jin was standing there waiting for him. Vanquish evil! Han Jin suddenly roared. His long sword swept out, once again slashing towards his opponent's neck. The figure's right arm was cut off, and the saber light accurately cut into the wound on his neck. The next moment, he was thrown straight out and landed more than 50 meters away. When he staggered up again, his neck was only connected by a bit of flesh and skin. This kind of injury was too serious. His head lost its support and hung upside down in front of his chest. Streams of extremely thick black smoke gushed out from his neck. Soon after, the black smoke disappeared without a trace under the burning of the flames. After another 7 or 8 steps, the figure finally exhausted all of his strength. With a plop, he knelt on the ground. Then, a miserable cry that seemed to be echoed by tens of thousands of souls rang out, and the figure slowly fell to the ground. Chapter 545. A body that was only slightly taller than an ordinary human had actually turned into an active volcano. Black and thick smoke continuously rose from the corpse. However, under the cleansing of the multicolored light, the smoke only rose a few meters before it was completely dispersed by the flames and disappeared without a trace. After an unknown amount of time, the figure completely disappeared, and the tens of thousands of rays of sunlight that filled the sky gradually faded, and the world became real again. Han Jin slowly exhaled a long breath. His efforts over the past few months had not been in vain. Without the yin-yang amplification formation, none of them would have been able to leave this place alive. Speaking of which, he really had to thank Catherine. Without her threat, Han Jin would not have thought of setting up the yin-yang amplification formation. Without her reminder, Han Jin would not have been able to make the decision to change the formation in time. The situation at the time was too critical. If Han Jin had been just a little bit slower, the outcome would have been completely different. Thinking of this, Han Jin turned to look at Catherine and happened to meet her complicated gaze. Han Jin gave her a friendly smile and walked toward where Jadius and Adolf were. In Han Jin's eyes, the yin-yang amplification formation's dazzling scene was not surprising. If there was enough vital energy to support him to set up the cosmic star formation or the legendary transmute demon formation that could slaughter all demons in the world, perhaps it would have been much easier for him. However, the others were greatly shocked. Han Jin's magic that could change the world with just a wave of his hand could no longer be called magic. It could be described as a miracle. Catherine stared at Han Jin in a daze, and she did not know what to feel. Although Han Jin's strength had already attracted her attention, it was only attention. She did not expect that in just a few months, this young man would undergo such a drastic change. Of all the people present, no one knew better than Catherine what kind of existence that figure was. The avatar of the god of death, the projection of Hamas in this world, had disappeared just like that. At the moment of life and death, with her extremely sharp intuition, she believed that since the magic formation set up by Han Jin could even imprison her, it should also pose a threat to the god of death, Hamas. Therefore, she placed her hope on Han Jin. However, when what she hoped for really happened, her feelings became extremely complicated. Why? This young man's strength was obviously not as strong as hers. But the magic he released could not even be blocked by the god of death. Even when facing the angel of dominion, Alpha, she had never taken a step back. But looking at this young man, she felt a sense of fear in her heart. Who on earth was he? Han Jin's image in Catherine's eyes had undergone a drastic change. Before this, the only use of Han Jin for Catherine was that he might be able to unlock the seal in Lenin's body. It was because of Lenin that Catherine was here. Otherwise, with Catherine's temperament, how could she care about a mere holy crown city? But now, Catherine had every reason to suspect that Han Jin deliberately unlocked Lenin's seal. Imagine, how could a powerful existence that could even defeat the avatar of the god of death be hindered by a small seal? Alpha, the angel of dominion, was indeed powerful, but he could not be compared with a real god. At this time, Lenin floated to Catherine's side and asked with concern, "How are you?" "I'm fine." Catherine glanced at Lenin, slowly shook her head, and then turned her eyes to Han Jin. In her opinion, everything that Han Jin did should have a deeper meaning. As for why he refused to unlock Lenin's seal, Catherine could not think of a reason no matter how hard she thought about it. Of course, Han Jin didn't know that his image in Catherine's mind had been greatly upgraded. A simple matter had been greatly complicated by the fallen angel. He smiled and stood in front of Jedis. After carefully observing him, he nodded and said with relief, "Fortunately, we came in time." Jedis' face was pale, but he seemed to be in good spirits. He smiled and said, "Sir, if I had known that you would come back, I would not have worked so hard." Han Jin could not help but laugh. Just as he was about to speak, he found that Adolf had unknowingly run behind him. Adolf's expression was serious, and his body was straight as a javelin. The fanaticism and reverence in his eyes could be seen even by a child. Han Jin could not help but have a headache. He did not know what to say to Adolf. After thinking about it, he decided not to say anything and let him continue to misunderstand. A clear cry came from the sky, and Bao Bao's figure quickly flew over from a distance. Before it could reach the ground, Yelena released a levitation spell and flew toward Han Jin. Bao Bao was startled and then hurriedly chased after her, but its expression was a little depressed. She nervously looked at Han Jin from head to toe. Seeing that Han Jin was fine, Yelena was relieved. She turned her head and glared at Bao Bao. Bao Bao immediately moved a few steps to the side, looking frightened. It even raised its wings in front of its body, carefully observing Yelena's expression from time to time. "What's wrong?" Han Jin asked, amused. How did this fearless immortal bird become so sneaky? She looked like a child who had done something bad. "It's all because of it," Yelena said angrily. "It only knows how to run. I didn't help at all. If something happened to you..." At this point, Yelena's voice was choked with sobs. All right. Look at me. Aren't I doing well?" Han Jin hurriedly comforted her. "That monster is indeed very powerful. It's normal for Bao Bao to be scared. It's still young." As soon as Han Jin's voice fell, Bao Bao immediately moved over and rubbed against Yelena's back, trying to please her. It turned out that Bao Bao actually understood Han Jin's words. It really understood. Yelena glared at Bao Bao a few more times, but in the end, she was tickled by Bao Bao and could not help but laugh. Seeing that it was effective, Bao Bao rubbed even more vigorously, and the two of them became a mess. "Powerful? It's more than powerful," Jed said, looking at Han Jin carefully. "You really don't know?" Han Jin was stunned. "Know what?" As soon as the sentence came out, everyone looked at Han Jin strangely. This time, even Adolf could not help but say, "Sir, Soul Chain is a spell that can only be released by God." Han Jin opened his mouth. Although he looked calm and collected, he was shocked. Did I just kill a god? However, after thinking about it, it seemed unlikely. The power of the yin-yang amplification formation was not bad, but it was a bit exaggerated to say that it could kill a god. However, when he looked at the expressions of the people around him, they all seemed to think that he should know. For a moment, he did not know what to say. "Your Excellency Raphael, I really can't see through you." Catherine and Lenin walked over. Are you worried about something? Someone who can kill a clone of the death god doesn't know about the soul chain? So it was a clone? Han Jin suddenly understood. He knew that the yin-yang amplification formation would not be able to reach that level. Under the teachings of Solomon, he knew very well what kind of power the gods of this world had. According to the standards of the cultivators of the other world, death god Hamas should be equivalent to a Daluo immortal, or even higher. The yin-yang amplification formation could deal with earth immortals, but to kill a Daluo immortal was purely a dream. However, if that was the case, what kind of power would be needed to kill a real god? Han Jin almost asked Catherine how the clone's strength compared to the main body, but after thinking about it, he decided against it. If he really did ask, these people would probably look at him strangely. Han Jin coughed and pretended not to hear Catherine's words. He asked Jed's, "How are our casualties?" Jed sighed. "The casualties are not very high, but the magic crystal reserve you left behind is almost used up. Let's go and have a look." Han Jin did not care about the others' reactions and walked straight into the Holy Crown City. Jed's and Adolf looked at each other, but neither of them spoke. They followed behind Han Jin. Catherine was silent for a moment at the side. Suddenly, she smiled inexplicably and pulled Lennon, who was beside her, to follow them. The scene in the city was extremely miserable. There were ruins and rubble everywhere, and there were corpses everywhere. But most of the corpses were hellhounds and minotaurs. Catherine's earth-shattering blow had destroyed a large part of the city wall. The broken bricks and stones covered the fierce battle that had once taken place here, but the black-red liquid that flowed out from the cracks was enough to prove the extent of the tragedy at that time. When they passed by the city wall, all the people of the Holy Crown City group glanced at Catherine at the same time. There was no other reason, but this was too fierce. You know, the wall was made of corundum, and you destroyed it with just one blow? Catherine, the initiator, did not feel anything. She just casually walked past, not caring about the gazes of others at all. At this time, Guevara came out of the city. He did not participate in the god-level battle outside the city, but it was more than enough to deal with some of the hellhounds and minotaurs that broke into the city. Han Jin smiled and greeted him. He always had a special feeling for this old man. "How are you?" Han Jin stood in front of Guevara and looked at the old man's gray temples. He had a lot of things to say, but in the end, he just asked softly, "Good, what's wrong with me?" Guevara laughed and patted Han Jin's shoulder heavily. "You're also very good. Really, Raphael, you are very good." Someone had already reported the battle outside the city to Guevara. Of course, Guevara was not as ignorant as Han Jin about the terrifying magic of the soul chain. The young man in front of him had already stood at a height that even he had to look up to. He had defeated the avatar of the death god in a short time. This had a great impact on Guevara. He wanted to look up to the sky and laugh, but even that was not enough to vent the excitement in his heart. In terms of the result of this battle, Han Jin was already standing at the top of the world. Even Nicholas, the Emperor of Magnificent Light, who gave Donald a lot of headaches, was overshadowed. Nothing could make Guevara feel more gratified than this. For the past few years, Han Jin had grown little by little, and all of this had happened under Guevara's watch. For the first time, Guevara sincerely hoped that he could live for a few more years to see Han Jin succeed with his own eyes. Jed's suddenly pointed to the sky in surprise. "What's with that teleportation array?" Everyone looked in the direction of Jed's finger. The round mirror made of white light was still quietly hovering in the sky. "This is the magic array we use to teleport here," Han Jin replied, a little puzzled by Jed's tone. "I know it's a magic array." Jed's was a little excited. "But why isn't it disappearing?" Hearing Jed's words, Catherine looked up and couldn't help but feel puzzled. A teleportation array was nothing special. As long as there were enough magic crystals in time, it could be completed. The problem was that a teleportation array usually lasted between 10 seconds to 10 minutes. Now that such a long time had passed, the light of the array still hadn't disappeared. This was somewhat unreasonable. Haha, this is Mr. Zhenglin's masterpiece. Speaking of this teleportation array, Han Jin's mood was incomparably good. With this, he could shuttle between various battlefields at will. He no longer had to worry about being in a dangerous situation and not being able to get there in time. Zhengli, Jeds was stunned for a moment, then laughed. No wonder this guy always gives us unexpected surprises. How long can this magic array last? Guevara's attention was also attracted. That depends on the situation. Han Jin pondered for a moment, then slowly said, "What situation?" Jeds and Guevara asked in unison. This was too important. The longer the magic array lasted, the greater its effect. Even Catherine and Lennon stopped talking and looked over in unison. They were also very curious. Han Jin looked at everyone's expressions and couldn't help but laugh. If no one destroys it, then it can always be used. Or, the god of war will turn off the teleportation array. What? What? Cries of surprise rang out everywhere. Even the taciturn Lennon couldn't help but join the crowd. After Mr. Zhenglin saw the Hell's Gate set up in the Freedom Federation, he received inspiration and made changes to the normal teleportation array. Han Jin wasn't surprised by their reaction at all. When this magic matrix was successfully constructed, Zhenglin had confidently said that it was definitely a milestone in the field of space magic for human beings. Wait, Guevara pulled Han Jin back. There's a Hell's Gate in the Freedom Federation? Yes. Han Jin nodded. Otherwise, we would have already dealt with the matter over there. Guevara frowned. Hell's Gate? That meant that the Abyss army could continuously step on the ground from there. He couldn't even imagine what kind of scene it would be. It doesn't matter, Han Jin said with a smile. If we hadn't learned that Prince Johnson was going to attack the Holy Crown City and had no choice but to rush back, I think we would have already destroyed the Hell's Gate. It's not that simple. Guevara slowly shook his head, then looked deeply at Han Jin. He was very clear in his heart that the great demon Donald's purpose of building the Hell's Gate wasn't just to transport the Hellhounds and Minotaurs. There would definitely be some important figures appearing there. Catherine muttered to herself, "It seems that Donald's situation is very bad." Catherine had every reason to say so. Since Donald sent his younger brother, Prince Johnson, to attack the Holy Crown City, which was not a famous city, it could be seen that the Abyss race didn't gain any advantage on the battlefield of the Freedom Federation. In the battle under the Holy Crown City, Johnson and more than a dozen great demons under his command were all killed. It was definitely an unbearable blow to Donald. At this moment, Catherine still didn't know that Donald's several sons had all died in the hands of Han Jin. If she knew, then she would have said this sentence with a very positive tone. That is to say, you can teleport back at any time through this magic array. Guevara asked. That's not all. Han Jin winked with a smile. What else? Guevara and Jeds were both stunned. Moreover, this teleportation magic array has the ability of two-way teleportation. Yelena smiled. As a Grand Magus, she knew better than Han Jin where the most exciting changes were. If you are willing, you can visit the Freedom Federation at any time. Miss Yelena, are you sure you're not joking? Jeds, who had always been gentle and elegant, opened his eyes wide. Two-way teleportation arrays were not rare, but it was necessary to set up the same teleportation array on the other side. For a teleportation array to have the ability of two-way teleportation, it was too shocking. Let's go to the Freedom Federation, Han Jin said with a smile. After Han Jin said this, everyone present, except for those who had just returned with Han Jin, was dumbfounded. A two-way teleportation magic array. What did this mean? There was no doubt that if what Han Jin said was true, then it meant that from today on, as long as there was an accurate magic array, Han Jin and his army would have a powerful mobility and could shuttle back and forth between various battlefields at any time. In the face of such an elusive army, who could stop them? Catherine's expression became complicated again. Although she was always alone wherever she went and didn't like to be followed by others, or rather, she disdained to borrow the power of others, it didn't mean that she didn't understand the significance of a two-way spatial teleportation array. Just as Zheng Jelen had said, this was a milestone for mankind. Go to the Freedom Federation? Jeds was interested. Okay. Guevara nodded. He also agreed with this suggestion. Dominique, you stay here and clean up the battlefield. Han Jin said, let's go. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 546. Annihilating more than a dozen great demons at once was a glorious victory. All creatures had to follow fixed laws, and so did the supergrade creatures. Among all the supergrade creatures, except for angels, all creatures had to reproduce through sex. Although the characteristics of the supergrade creatures were very different, they all had one thing in common. They all had extremely long lifespans. From a certain point of view, the laws of nature were fair. The supergrade creatures had a long lifespan, so their ability to reproduce was relatively weaker. To put it bluntly, if human beings had the same reproductive ability as supergrade creatures, perhaps human beings would have already perished. On the other hand, if supergrade creatures had the same reproductive ability as human beings, then human beings would have perished, and the whole world would have been crowded with supergrade creatures. The population of the demon race was not large to begin with. After subtracting half of the female demons, the old demons who were aging and could not bear the fierce battle, and the imps, there were only so many demon warriors. The number of great demons was even more limited. Including Donald's children, Hanjin had killed nearly 20 great demons. Nicholas was not idle either. With all the losses added together, it could be said that Donald had suffered an unimaginable blow. No one knew how Donald would react. Anyway, the Holy Crown City and Esnerly City were jubilant, and the big shots were busy visiting each other. At least they had to be familiar with each other, right? The teleportation circle on the God of War was never idle. After a while, Jedis and Guevara came over, but after a while, they went back because they still had things to deal with in the Holy Crown City. After a while, Kemoratsi, Honduras, and Thor of the South went over, and after a while, they came back, but one person was missing. Thorn of the South was missing. The patriarchs of the tribal alliance thought that there was a problem with the teleportation circle, and Thorn of the South was lost in the endless space. Kemoratsi and Honduras did not know where Thorn of the South went. The only thing they were sure of was that Thorn of the South did not enter the teleportation circle with them. When Hanjin heard this, he hurriedly asked Sunir to investigate. While they were busy, Thorn of the South came back and said that he was invited to a very luxurious bar by a man named Hal Lister. He also described with spittle flying everywhere that there were countless beauties and countless fine wines. As the saying goes, when fighting a tiger, one's own blood brothers should go into battle as father and son. Thorn was too embarrassed to enjoy life alone in the southern heaven, so he specially came back to gather his friends. The chiefs of the tribal alliance were overjoyed, and the tense atmosphere disappeared in an instant. They swarmed up and disappeared into the space transmission matrix in the blink of an eye. Kemoratsi, Honduras, and the others were also curious. Besides, it would be beneficial for them to have more contact with Hanjin's people in the future. Only Zungreen could not smile. Although the teleportation circle did not need to be activated repeatedly, as long as the coordinates of the Holy Crown City were locked, the magic power would be consumed as long as someone passed through it. Although the magic crystal left by the demon contained extremely pure and huge space elements, it was still limited. If this went on, it would only take a few days to replace the space magic crystal. However, everyone was so happy that he could not stand out and be the bad guy, so he could only endure silently. Harley did not participate in the battle, but stayed in Esnerly City because he was depressed. He had to do something, or at least let others be depressed with him. However, Harley's position was a bit awkward. He had no right to give orders or criticize anyone, so he naturally turned his attention to Bao Bao. "Brother, I don't want to criticize you, but how could you do this? It's not right." Harley had reached the point of being heartbroken. "What are you afraid of? Even if you are afraid, you shouldn't run away. If you do this, who will dare to trust you in the future? Who will entrust their lives to you?" If Harley dared to scold him like this, Bao Bao would have pecked Harley's head full of holes. But now, Bao Bao seemed to have realized his mistake. He lowered his head and looked very dispirited. "Harley," Hanjin called. He felt sorry for Bao Bao. Among the magical beasts he had met, Bao Bao was the most human-like one. He was just like a child. Master? Harley hurried over. That's enough. He was just born. Stop scolding him, Han Jin said. Oh. Harley looked back at Bao Bao. He was in high spirits, and Han Jin's words were like pouring a bucket of cold water on his head, which made him feel very unwilling. At this moment, Domini walked out of the teleportation circle. She glanced around and walked slowly to Han Jin. Sir, do you remember how many abyssal demons besieged the holy crowned city? Han Jin was stunned and thought for a moment. About 13 or 14, including Prince Johnson. Is it 13 or 14? Dominique asked again. It should be 14, Yelena answered from the side. That's strange. Domini showed a puzzled look. What's wrong? We searched back and forth on the battlefield several times. Domini took a cloth bag from her waist and bent over to put it on the table, but we only found 12 space magic crystals in total. Han Jin suddenly remembered that after Prince Johnson's body had mutated, Catherine had attacked with all her strength. However, only half of the abyssal demons that he had sealed with the suppress formula had been killed by him and Yelena, while the rest had been swept away by the shockwave. After that, he had focused all his attention on the residents of the god of death and had no time to care about the abyssal demons. So 1 or 2 abyssal demons escaped? Han Jin frowned deeply. If he guessed correctly, when the pure yang formation was formed, the abyssal demon had just woken up from its coma and quietly escaped when it saw that the situation was bad. The other demons that did not wake up in time were either killed by the pure yang formation, or they woke up too late and were too seriously injured to escape. Speaking of dealing with the abyssal demons, although the yin and yang formation was not as effective as the light magic, it still had great and terrible lethality. Raphael, can I go back and look for him? Yelena volunteered. No need. Han Jin shook his head slowly. After such a long time, he must have escaped or hidden somewhere. It's hard for us to catch him. But the secret of the magic formation? Yelena showed an anxious look. It's not a big deal. Han Jin said, if they don't dare to target the Holy Crown City from now on, it will be better for us. What's more, their knowledge is very limited. Even those dead abyssal demons don't know much. It's good that you're confident. Han Jin smiled, picked up the cloth bag put down by Domini, and poured out the space magic crystals inside. With a crisp sound of collision, 12 magic crystals that were almost transparent and full of light piled up on the table. Just now, Green was distressed about the meaningless consumption of the teleportation formation. Seeing so many magic crystals, he immediately walked over and stared at them. There were still 6 space magic crystals in Han Jin's space ring. Seeing Green's expression, Han Jin smiled knowingly. After calculating for a while, he picked up 4 space magic crystals and pushed the rest to Green. Mr. Green, I'll leave them to you. Han Jin said. Sir, don't you also need these magic crystals? Green was stunned, and then asked. 10 are enough for me. The rest are useless to me, so I'd better give them to you. Okay. Green didn't continue to refuse and neatly put away all the magic crystals. At this moment, Sunir's figure walked out of the teleportation matrix. She had gone to look for Thorn in the south of the heavens. After looking for him for a long time, she found out that he had been invited to the Night of Bliss by Hal Lister. This kind of undisciplined behavior made her feel helpless. Of course, Thorn in the south of the heavens wasn't a member of the organization at the moment, so he wasn't under her control. She had no choice but to give Ronning a few words of advice before rushing back. According to his habit, every time he saw a figure walking out of the teleportation formation, Green's eyebrows would quickly wrinkle. But now, he looked at Sunir with a big smile. As the saying goes, as long as there is food, there is no need to panic. The teleportation formation didn't have much energy, and the others didn't care about the consumption at all. Of course, Green was distressed. He had just obtained 8 top-grade space magic crystals, which were enough to support the teleportation formation for a long time. Raphael, that guy Thorn of the South, was invited to the blissful night by Hal Lister. Sunir said, I know. Thorn of the South just came back and called all the chiefs away. Han Jin laughed. Sunir was speechless for a moment. Haha, they will definitely have an eye-opener. Harley laughed strangely. Forget it. Morrison's continued. Esnerly City is much bigger than Holy Crown City, and richer. Besides, Esnerly City is the capital of the Freedom Confederation. What haven't they seen? Sir, we really don't have a place like the Blissful Night here. Bauer smiled bitterly. Since both Kemoratsi and Honduras had left, there must be someone here who could coordinate with Hanjin. In case of any accident, they would be able to respond immediately. Of course, Bauer was the best candidate. Are you kidding? Really, we don't. Only some small bars. Bauer said, and then he explained. In fact, the social distribution of Esnerly City was not much different from that of Holy Crown City. More than 90% of the wealth in Esnerly City was in the hands of the authorities, nobles, and professionals. However, Esnerly City's administrative facilities were different. The key was the House of Lords. All the representatives in the House of Lords were nobles. Every 3 years, there would be a round of elimination in which 11 representatives would be kicked out, just like a sports league in another world. Then, new nobles would be elected to fill the vacancies. The right to choose who to eliminate and who to keep was in the hands of the commoners. The commoners would always choose the meanest, trickiest, and least reputable representatives. Because of this, for the commoners, life in the Freedom Confederation was far better than in other places. Being kicked out of the center of power was not a good life. Losing their power, they could only barely survive by rent. And since you were kicked out, it meant that the commoners hated you the most. The consul and other representatives of the House of Lords would not hesitate to add insult to injury. On one hand, they could establish their own glorious image, and on the other hand, they could divide the wealth of the nobles who had lost their power. The fights between the nobles were often life or death. In sharp contrast, the commoners lived a happy and harmonious life. In times of great calamity and chaos, the representatives would donate money and goods in order to win over the hearts of the people. If they donated a lot and suffered a great loss, it would not be a big deal. If they could protect their position, they could get it back. If they donated too little, they would be hated by others. Not only would they not be able to get back what they donated, their original wealth might even belong to someone else as they lost their power. Under these circumstances, the nobles would naturally avoid 2 types of business. The first was food. If the price of food was set too low, they would not make a profit. If the price was set too high, they would definitely lose their position. In times of disaster, their situation would be even more miserable. Other people would donate money and goods to other businesses. If you hoarded so much food, would you dare not to use it to help the people? There was also a bar that symbolized debauchery. There was a popular saying in the Freedom Federation, a man who wasn't loyal to his wife couldn't possibly be loyal to his country or his own people. Aristocrats had always tried every possible means to show off their splendor and grandeur, keeping themselves clean and honest. Asking them to open a bar? That was simply murdering for money. If they were exposed by hostile nobles, only death would await them. Without the support of the nobles, their business would not be able to expand. This created a very strange scene. In Esnerly City, small service establishments could be seen everywhere, but none of them were large. For example, the Lord of Holy Crown City, Dismark, had actually built a huge entertainment city. To the people of the Freedom Federation, this was inconceivable. Of course, there must be a very secret place for the nobles to have fun, but Bauer did not need to tell them. Moreover, the scale of those places would not be very big and could not be compared to the Night of Bliss. Hearing Bauer's explanation, everyone was dumbfounded. They could not understand. How could the commoners decide the fate of the nobles? If so, what was the point of the nobles' hard work and the professionals' hard work? Once they could not gain the approval of the commoners, they would be abandoned by society. Sir, it seems the Freedom Federation and us have too many areas that do not match. We should be more careful in the future to avoid conflicts. Seeing that Han Jin was not paying attention to him and seemed to be sitting there in a daze. Zhenglin slightly raised his voice. "Sir, what are you thinking?" "Nothing." Han Jin raised his head and smiled. Perhaps, among the experts in the Holy Crown City, he was the only one who could understand the Freedom Federation. Asterisk, 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 asterisk in the following period of time. The situation seemed to be very calm. The flame tyrant Lonker was obviously scared by Han Jin. He led the evil fire spirits to wander around the Hell's Gate, and no longer had the intention to attack Esnearly City. The roles of the attacker and the defender had changed. Thorn of the South often sent out Wyvern Knight to investigate the situation of the Hell's Gate. Since the enemy had stopped attacking, the ground races naturally had to find a way to take the initiative. Kemoratsi and Honduras fully supported Thorn of the South's plan. The existence of the Hell's Gate was a thorn in the throat of the Freedom Federation. It had to be pulled out, otherwise they would always be threatened by the abyssal races. Thorn of the South also used facts to prove that he was not a man of action. In his speech, he always gave people the impression that he was careless, but in his actions, he was very cautious. He sent out no more than 10 Wyvern Knights at a time, not because he was worried that the Wyvern Knights would be killed, but because he didn't want to arouse the enemy's suspicion. Hundreds of Wyvern Knights constantly roamed around the Hell's Gate, undoubtedly telling the enemy that they had to be careful. They were preparing to attack, and were now trying to investigate their arrangements. According to the information sent back by the Wyvern Knights, the flame tyrant Lonker hadn't wasted his time in vain. Tens of thousands of individual bunkers had been dug in the mountains and hills of various sizes near the Hell's Gate. If the ones hiding inside were evil eyes, they would be able to form a net of fire covering the sky and earth. Any life form that approached would suffer unimaginable damage. Moreover, the Wyvern Knights sensed that the mana fluctuations near the Hell's Gate were very strong, and they also saw a large number of evil spirits. Clearly, the Flame Tyrant Lonker had received reinforcements and set up a large number of magic arrays near the Hell's Gate, preparing to welcome the counterattack of the Freedom Federation and the Tribal Alliance. If they really fought, it would definitely be a fierce battle. Thorn and the South had racked their brains for this. However, the people on Han Jin's side were somewhat cold. Han Jin himself had been hiding in his magic laboratory for several days, rarely coming out. This gave Kemoratsi and Honduras a headache. They knew that without Han Jin's cooperation, even the most exquisite plan would be useless. On this day, Han Jin was deep in thought in his magic laboratory when Harley's voice woke him up. "Master, Master, what's the matter?" Han Jin asked with some displeasure. "Master, that Dragon Knight Dick came again. He asked me to give you this letter." Harley cautiously said outside the magic laboratory. "Come in." Han Jin paused. "Where is he?" "He's in the city hall, chatting with Kemoratsi and the others." "The letter, here it is." Harley hurriedly handed over a letter. Han Jin took the letter and casually tore it open. Rather than calling a letter, it was better to call it a note. There was no greeting, no greetings, only a line of characters. It was a short 2 sentences. "I changed my mind. This is a battle that belongs to us." A trace of smile appeared on Han Jin's face. When he had first learned of Nicholas's plan, he had already made a decision. Although Adolphe, Green, and the others were also very interested in Nicholas's plan, when the day came, he would not let Adolphe and Green participate. Chapter 547. Ever since he received Nicholas' letter, Han Jin had never appeared again. Even Guevara and Jedis couldn't wait any longer and urged Harley to ask what was going on. However, the magic laboratory had been completely sealed off by Han Jin, and even Harley couldn't enter. Catherine was also anxious. The seal hidden in Lennon's body had always been a thorn in her heart, and the key to breaking the seal could only be obtained from Han Jin. However, Lennon didn't seem to care much about it. For him, being able to see Catherine again was already the greatest gift, and nothing else mattered. After Sunir and Yelena learned that Harley wouldn't be able to enter the room, they gave up their unnecessary worries. After all, Han Jin would be fine in his own magic laboratory. With nothing else to do, the two of them spent most of their time studying the new holy weapons they had just obtained. In a magic laboratory, Han Jin floated above the holy crystal. With the help of the holy crystal, the spatial elements contained in the 10 spatial magic crystals had long been extracted and condensed into a looming mist belt in the air. Every time Han Jin inhaled, the mist belt would slowly collapse into his body, and every time Han Jin exhaled, the mist belt would slowly spread out with him as the center, and the brilliant starlight would be completely covered by the mist belt. When Han Jin's exhalation reached its limit, he would temporarily stop breathing, and the mist belt would turn into a thick black mass along with Han Jin, the holy crystal, and the entire magic laboratory, as if they had never existed. Then, Han Jin would begin to inhale, and the mist belt would reappear and continue to collapse into his body, condensing into a very small dot. Han Jin was using the spatial elements to refine the summer mustard seed. This was an extremely dangerous method. If one breath cycle was equivalent to one forging, the whole process would require 48,000 continuous forging, and it couldn't be interrupted or disrupted. If anyone rushed in and disturbed Han Jin at this time, it would lead to disastrous consequences. Han Jin maintained a very regular breathing rhythm. One exhale took about 3 seconds, one inhale took 3 seconds, and one stop took 4 seconds. In this way, it would take 6 days to complete 48,000 tempering cycles. One could only imagine how powerful his divine sense was to maintain a calm mind for 6 whole days. When Han Jin stepped on the deck and appeared in front of everyone again, 8 days had passed. However, not only was Han Jin not tired at all, he was even more energetic. As soon as Han Jin's figure appeared, everyone's eyes immediately focused on him. Of course, his friends knew that Han Jin was in seclusion training for the upcoming war, so they tried to find any changes in Han Jin. Han Jin glanced around and found that the deck was especially full of people today. Not only were Guevara, Jedis, and the others present, even Thorn and Tian Nan, who were enjoying themselves in the Holy Crown City, were sitting there. I told you, you would never miss this opportunity. Guevara laughed. Raphael, when are you leaving? Han Jin walked to Guevara's side and sat down. Today, I still have some things to take care of. Today? Guevara was surprised. Yes, I'd rather be early than late. Otherwise, that Nicholas will think that I'm unworthy of my reputation. Han Jin laughed. Everyone laughed. At this time, Adolf slowly walked out from the crowd and went straight to Han Jin's side, standing there quietly. Seeing this scene, Jedis couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Even when the Pope was still alive, Adolf had never behaved like this. You should at least leave some face for me, the Pope. However, in the eyes of others, Adolf's actions were understandable. If Han Jin needed it, they would not hesitate to stand behind Han Jin respectfully like Adolf. A person who could kill the Avatar of Death was fully qualified to receive the corresponding respect. Who are you going to take with you? Guevara asked the question that everyone was concerned about. There was no doubt that Han Jin would face an extremely fierce battle, and the danger was self-evident. However, such a battle was the most desirable thing for powerhouses. Adolf's body straightened even more. Catherine slowly stood up from her seat. Under such circumstances, Han Jin might not be able to make any requests of her. No matter how powerful Han Jin was, he could not command a fallen angel like she was his subordinate. However, Catherine decided to participate in this battle that did not belong to her. She wanted to make sure that when Han Jin removed the seal in Lenin's body in the future, he would have no excuse to refuse. There is no such thing as a free lunch in the world, and Catherine knew this very well. The seal of Alpha, the archangel of authority, could not be easily broken by anyone. Even someone as strong as Han Jin would have to spend a lot of effort to do so. Therefore, Catherine needed to do something to increase her weight in Han Jin's heart. Han Jin looked at Catherine's expression and thought about Adolf behind him. He could not help but feel a headache coming on. After pondering for a long time, he said carefully, "I'm afraid that I won't be able to come back in a short time." In order to ensure the safety of this place, we must have sufficient defensive forces. So, I plan to go alone, Han Jin continued. As soon as he finished speaking, the hall suddenly fell silent. You mean, after a while, Guevara recovered from his shock. He looked a little confused and worried. Since Nicholas dares to take the risk alone, what am I afraid of? I can't guarantee anything else, but when it comes to escaping, I'm afraid that no one here can compare to me. Right? Han Jin said with a smile. Didn't Nicholas say that he would lead a team of Dragon Knight to meet up with you? Zagreen asked in surprise. He changed his mind. Although everyone knew that Han Jin was telling the truth, no one could accept this result, especially Adolf. His wrinkled, old face showed a rare expression of excitement. My lord, Adolf was very unwilling to accept this result. He looked at Han Jin with bright eyes. Catherine also spoke. Sir Raphael, you seem to have not realized one thing. There shouldn't be anyone here who is more familiar with the Abyss world than I am. Han Jin sighed. To be honest, I don't want to go alone either. But what if Donald sends another team of demons? Also, our enemies are not only the Abyssal race. Perhaps this is a trap that Nicholas set for me. Have you thought about what would happen if we all left and Nicholas, Dragon City, and Dragon Realm sent powerhouses to attack us? Adolf was silent for a while, and in the end, he didn't say anything. Although Jed's overlapping spells were powerful, he was still a pure magician. Compared to Adolf, he was a bit weaker. In front of an opponent of Johnson's level, he was too dangerous. Catherine couldn't refute Han Jin's words. Adolf could only cause damage to the great abyssal demon, but if the demon wanted to escape, Adolf couldn't do anything about it. Of all the people on the deck, Catherine was the only one who had the ability to kill a demon, except for Han Jin. I'll leave this place to you, Han Jin said solemnly as he stood up slowly. After a short silence, Adolf said reluctantly, Don't worry, my lord. Although Catherine was disappointed, she could only accept the fact. She suddenly hoped that the demon would really attack them. That way, it would be much easier to ask Han Jin for help in the future. However, what Catherine didn't know was that Han Jin didn't remove the seal for Lenin because of some groundless reason. With Han Jin's current strength, he really couldn't do anything about the seal. After bidding farewell to the people on the deck and comforting Yelena and Sunir, whose eyes were red, Han Jin summoned Heavenly Tao and rushed out of the God of War. He drew a bright purple light in the air and stepped into the unknown battlefield. At the same time, the flame tyrant Lonker was sitting near the Hell's Gate. The magma, flowing slowly under his body, emitted a golden-red flame. The scorching heat caused the surrounding air and scenery to become distorted. With Lonker as the center, there were busy figures everywhere within a radius of dozens of miles. The construction of the magic circle was nearing completion. Donald's order was simple: guard the Hell's Gate. This behemoth, which took a huge amount of manpower and material resources to build, was the key for the abyssal race to set foot on the ground. There must be no mistakes. Although Lonker didn't dare to take the initiative to attack Esnerly City, he was completely confident that he could resist the human alliance with the surrounding terrain and a large number of magic circles. He believed that even if Raphael rushed here, he wouldn't dare to ignore the attack of the Flame Tyrant and forcefully destroy the Hell's Gate. That would be no different from suicide. After half a day, Han Jin had approached the defense area of the Abyssal Army. He suddenly turned his body and landed lightly on the ground. At the same time as Han Jin landed, a figure jumped out of the nearby forest. After a few flashes, he was already waiting there. Have you been waiting for me for a long time? Han Jin asked softly. Almost 6 days, Leonardo replied respectfully. 6 days? It seems that your efficiency is beyond my imagination. My lord, everything you want is here. Leonardo smiled and handed over a dark gray box. I haven't been idle these past few days. I wrote down everything I could think of. Many thanks, Han Jin said as he took the box. My lord, you're too polite. This is what I should do. Leonardo's answer was very standard and formal. He then hesitated for a moment. My lord, have you really decided? Yes. After a moment of daze, Leonardo sighed. My lord, I have to say that you have unparalleled bravery in the world. In my impression, there has never been a powerhouse who dared to unparalleled in the world. Han Jin smiled and interrupted Leonardo's flattery. You're wrong. I have a companion. Leonardo was stunned. He asked tentatively, My lord, are you talking about Nicola? Han Jin didn't answer. He slowly opened the box and took out the item inside to carefully memorize it. Leonardo tactfully kept his mouth shut. He only spoke when Han Jin asked him something. Most of the time, he just stood there quietly. The sun slowly sank below the horizon. The dark night didn't affect Han Jin's vision. He continued to read and memorize. Time flew by quickly. Unknowingly, the sun rose from another direction. When the sun shone down, Han Jin slowly closed the book and put it back into the box. He then put the box back into his spatial ring and looked up at the sun in a daze. My lord, for all the races on the surface, sunlight is the most beautiful scenery, right? Leonardo smiled. You look at it every day. Isn't it enough? Don't you feel that the sun today is a bit special? Han Jin asked. Special? Leonardo was fooled. He looked up for a long time, but couldn't see anything special. Fortunately, he had the blood of a black dragon. Otherwise, looking at the sun for so long would cause problems for his eyes. All right, let's stop here. Han Jin smiled. The rising sun was the signal he and Nicholas agreed to attack. Leonardo obviously didn't know. Leonardo, it's best if you find a place to hide for a while and wait for me to come back. Yes, my lord, Leonardo replied in a low voice. When the sun rose, the flame tyrant Lonker was patrolling the defensive line as usual. Suddenly, he saw the hellhounds in the distance start to become restless. A strange premonition appeared in Lonker's mind. Before Lonker could stand up to see what was going on, a purple light had already appeared in the sky. At this time, all the Abyss warriors stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. The evil eyes and Medusas immediately hid behind cover and prepared to fire. The Minotaurs and Longhorn demons followed the purple light and quickly gathered in the direction of the gates of hell. There were even some evil spirits mixed in. When Lonker saw that it was only Han Jin who came, he couldn't help but be furious. This was utter contempt. Did that guy really think he could destroy the gates of hell by himself? You will pay for your actions today, Lonker said fiercely in his heart. His eyes were fixed on Han Jin, and the flames on his body burned even more fiercely. Han Jin's figure was getting closer and closer. All the Hell Warriors were nervously looking at the purple light in the sky. To them, Han Jin's existence was no longer as simple as a human. He was more like a curse that would take their lives. Han Jin was very fast. In the blink of an eye, he was only a few thousand meters away from the gates of hell. A Minotaur chief roared and threw out the giant axe in his hand. The cold glint of the axe spun in the air, like a bugle call to attack. Countless lights flashed on the nearby mountains. Faint red rays of light converged on Han Jin from all directions, weaving into a giant net that lit up the entire sky. In comparison, Han Jin, who was at the center of the net, looked a bit frail. Han Jin's figure had already disappeared from the sky, perfectly dodging those fatal rays. In the next moment, he appeared on the ground. The heavenly Tao had turned into a crescent moon blade that he held in his hand. A whip suddenly tore through the air, appearing from the dust in the sky. It drew a strange arc as it shot toward Han Jin's throat with unbelievable speed. This level of attack, naturally, could not do anything to Han Jin. Han Jin flicked his finger. His movement seemed slow, but it just happened to collide with the whip. The whip was like a long snake that had lost its strength. It trembled for a moment before softly falling to the ground. The long saber in Han Jin's hand glowed with purple light and swept out. A scream came from the dust and smoke, and a tall red figure stumbled in front of Han Jin. He was still holding a long whip in his hand, but he no longer had the strength to attack. Han Jin's saber had almost cut him in half, and a large amount of blood was gushing out from his chest and abdomen. Even so, The red figure still didn't fall down and stared at Hanjin with a pair of blood-red eyes. This was an evil spirit? Hanjin was somewhat surprised by the evil spirit's vitality, but this was just a trivial matter. Hanjin acted as if he did not see the other party's vicious gaze. He walked past the evil spirit, and with a swing of his blade, he cut off the evil spirit's head and ended its pain. At this moment, the nearby minotaurs and long-horned demons reacted. They roared and charged at Hanjin. Hanjin's figure suddenly accelerated. The heavenly Tao in his hand scattered a resplendent light. Wails rang out everywhere. The minotaurs and long-horned demons' bodies were clearly incomparable to the evil spirits. As long as they were within the heavenly Tao's attack range, they were all cut in half. Every time the crescent blade was swung, there would be a rain of blood. Hanjin charged straight for the Hell's Gate in this rain of blood, leaving a long river of blood behind him. The flame tyrant Lonker stood in front of the gates of hell and watched as Hanjin massacred the minotaurs. However, he didn't dare to move. The deaths of a few minotaurs didn't matter, but the gates of hell couldn't be lost. Lonker could sense that Hanjin's target was not the minotaurs and longhorn demons, nor was it himself. It was the Hell's Gate behind him. Hanjin's speed was simply too fast. Whether it was the minotaurs or the evil spirits in front of him, none of them could stop him. In just a few breaths of time, Hanjin had slaughtered his way through the entire battle formation. If he went any further, he would reach Lonker's lava barrier. Hanjin slowly raised the crescent blade in his hand and pointed it at Lonker. He revealed a meaningful smile. At this moment, the mountains and hills near the Hell's Gate suddenly lit up. Faint red rays shot out from all directions. In the past, as long as Hanjin slaughtered his way into the enemy's formation, the evil eyes and Medusas would become mere decorations. He hid in the sea of people and slaughtered without restraint. The evil eyes and Medusas had no way of locking onto Hanjin, nor could they find a suitable angle to attack. The flame tyrant Lonker had spent so much effort to dig hundreds of thousands of holes in the nearby hills to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chitian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 548. If he had waited until he saw the rays before dodging, even someone as powerful as the fallen angel Kathleen might have lost her life on the spot. It was unavoidable, as no one could outrun the speed of light. Hanjin was well aware of the power of the evil eye's collective attacks. His divine sense scanned the battlefield, and when he sensed the large group of evil eyes raising their antennae as if they had received some kind of order, he had already retreated underground. Countless rays fused together at the spot where Hanjin had disappeared. The pale red light condensed into a scorching white color at the center and rapidly expanded. More than a dozen longhorn devils and minotaurs couldn't dodge in time and were instantly swallowed by the light. Only a slight squeaking sound was left, followed by a scorching smell. Hanjin rose up from another place. With a swing of his long blade, a silk-like stream of light cut through a few longhorn demons around him. His gaze was still focused on the flame tyrant Longhorn, as if he was provoking him. If it was any other time, Longhorn would have already charged up in a rage. However, after staring blankly for a moment, Longhorn took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. He glared fiercely at Hanjin with his fiery eyes, but in the end, he did not take the initiative to attack. The only strange thing was that the lava ground beneath Longhorn's feet was burning even more fiercely, reflecting Longhorn's current mood. Hanjin smiled. His body suddenly rose from the ground, and his crescent moon blade slashed down with an unstoppable momentum towards Longhorn's head. His roar was like a thunderclap that resounded through the heavens. Longhorn! A dozen or so evil fire spirits roared as they blocked in front of Longhorn. At the same time, countless cracks suddenly appeared in the lava ground. Scorching hot golden red lava shot out from every crack as if a dense group of flame pythons had appeared out of thin air. Lonker roared furiously. The flames on his body were so bright that they were dazzling. The surrounding temperature suddenly rose. As long as he was in this lava barrier, he would not be afraid of being injured. Lonker had already made up his mind that he would not retreat even half a step. Even if he was chopped into pieces, he would leave something on Han Jin's body. That was indeed the case. If Han Jin were to disregard everything and slash down with his saber, he would definitely deal some damage to Lonker. However, he would not be in good condition either. Putting aside the fact that the lava barrier was so hot that it could melt steel, Lonker's strength was not to be underestimated. However, something unexpected happened. Han Jin's charging figure suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already behind Lonker. In other words, Han Jin's current position was between Longhorn and the Hell's Gate. As long as he took another step forward, he would be able to enter the Hell's Gate. Longhorn, who had gathered all his strength in preparation for a fatal blow, realized that he had been fooled. Although he did not know what Han Jin's goal was, he did not have the time to think about it. Two large fists covered in flames whistled towards Han Jin. Longhorn believed that even if Han Jin had the ability to teleport, he would not be able to dodge his attack while attacking the Hell's Gate. Reality once again disappointed the Flame Tyrant. Han Jin gave Longhorn a mocking smile. He did not make any movements to attack. He only took a step forward and disappeared into the Hell's Gate. Longhorn's fists continued to smash forward. The only difference was that his target had suddenly changed to the Hell's Gate. This sudden turn of events gave Longhorn a fright. He had to use all his strength to stop his attack. However, in the next moment, Longhorn could no longer suppress his anger. The smile on Han Jin's face before he disappeared was like a sharp blade that constantly cut into Longhorn's bleeding nerves. That was a smile that contained contempt, and mockery. Longhorn was so depressed that he wanted to howl at the sky. Was he such an insignificant existence in the eyes of the other party? Longhorn stared blankly at the Hell's Gate. After a while, he realized a serious fact. Han Jin had entered the Hell's Gate. All of the abyssal races stood there in a daze. They looked at the place where Han Jin had disappeared. They all had the same question in their minds. What was that Raphael trying to do? On the other side of the Hell's Gate was a vast and boundless plain. Unlike the plains in other parts of the abyss, this was a world of fiery red. Wave after wave of fire, elemental storms constantly blew against the ground. The soil underfoot was also very strange. Not only was it abnormally solid, but it was also a translucent red. Looking down from above, the entire plain looked like a huge ruby. In the center of the plain was an ancient castle-like building that was nearly 100 meters tall. It was neither too big nor too small, about 7 or 8 square kilometers. The castle was also a translucent red that blended in with the soil. On the east and west sides of the castle were 2 Hell's Gates. Han Jin's figure appeared from the Hell's Gate in the east. At first, his eyes were somewhat blank. This was the aftereffect of forcefully passing through the Hell's Gate. The spatial turbulence would have a certain effect on the spiritual power of life. In the next moment, Han Jin returned to normal. He slowly scanned his surroundings. There were corpses everywhere. Near the Hell's Gate, on the plain, and on the castle walls, there was blood and corpses everywhere. The color of the blood was very fresh, as if there had just been a cruel massacre. In the west side of the Hell's Gate, there was a lonely figure sitting there. He also noticed Han Jin. He slowly raised his head, and his sharp eyes instantly pierced through the red mist and nailed onto Han Jin's face. Raphael, a voice filled with indifference, was heard. Nicola, Han Jin said softly. You're late. Han Jin smiled and slowly walked forward. A pair of old enemies, the masters of the North and South Poles of the world, or perhaps the future rulers, actually met in the Abyss world. Sometimes, fate was just too humorous. It was also because of this specific environment that they were destined not to have a conflict, at least not for the time being. Neither of them answered. Rather than saying that they were confirming each other's identity, It was better to say that they were greeting each other because no one else could barge in except for them. Closer, the two sides were getting closer and closer. Hanjin saw a shallow but very obvious scar on Nicola's left cheek. He remembered that he had never heard Jeds mention it before. Obviously, this scar was left recently. Hanjin suddenly had a strange feeling in his heart, and then he shifted his gaze. Nicola also turned his gaze to his feet at the same time. Both of them had black hair and black eyes, but their appearances and temperaments were completely different. Hanjin was very handsome, and could even be described as handsome. If the armor was replaced with a gorgeous robe, and the crescent blade was replaced with a crystal-clear wine glass, Hanjin would not look like a powerhouse who held the power of life and death in his hands. He should be a beautiful young man who was used to socializing in luxurious banquets, spreading his talent, nobility, and perhaps even the seeds of love. On the other hand, the lines on Nicola's face were very firm. At first glance, one could tell that he was a tough man, especially the new scar on his left cheek. It added a sense of vicissitudes to him, and it also highlighted the power of looking down on the world. From time to time, a cynical smile would appear at the corner of his mouth, but it made his coldness and power suddenly become vivid. Without this smile, the silent Nicola was very much like a lifeless statue, or perhaps he was just putting on an act. But with this smile, Nicola seemed to be full of spirit, and it also made him seem more approachable. "What are you waiting for?" Hanjin saw that Nicola still had no intention of getting up and asked softly. "Waiting for you, and also waiting for Donald." Nicola raised his head again. "But he's obviously not as good as you. After waiting for a long time, he still doesn't dare to come in. If I knew that you were waiting for me, maybe I wouldn't have come in." Hanjin smiled. When he just stepped through the teleportation portal, he felt a sense of spatial disorientation. Although it was very short, less than a second, for a real powerhouse, a second was enough to determine life and death. "Why did you take so long?" Nicola also revealed a smile. "Did you think that I wouldn't be able to break through Donald's blockade so easily?" "I'm indeed a little surprised." Hanjin was too lazy to lie. There is no point in deliberately belittling Nicola. On the contrary, it would only show that he was at a disadvantage. "The answer is there." Nicola stretched out his hand and pointed diagonally. "Oh!" Hanjin raised his eyes. His telepathic thoughts were already operating to the limit. Facing Nicola, he had to maintain a high level of vigilance. In fact, both sides knew that the cooperation was only temporary. If the war ended with the defeat of the surface races, then there would be nothing to talk about. If they could defeat Donald, then there would definitely be a life-and-death battle between them, or even a war. And Nicola's right hand was hanging by his waist, only a few inches away from the hilt of his sword. With his sitting posture, it would be more convenient to use his right hand to point in the direction, but he chose to use his left hand. His right hand seemed to be reluctant to move. This could only mean two things. One was that he was guarding against Hanjin, and the other was that he had evil intentions. Of course, the possibility of the former was 90%. To be able to create the magnificent light empire, Nicola should know how to choose. At least in the situation where the war wasn't clear, he shouldn't kill each other. This was a kind of acknowledgement. With Hanjin's current strength, no one dared to ignore his existence. At this moment, the two poles of the world, the two great powerhouses with distinct barriers, were abiding by the same principle. One must always be vigilant against others. A white battle dress jumped into Hanjin's eyes, and then a figure shot towards Hanjin and Nicola like lightning. "Enkiel." Hanjin was shocked. "You don't seem to welcome me?" Enkiel's smile was extremely beautiful and charming. That perfect face once again made Hanjin absent-minded, but he quickly came back to his senses. He looked at Nicola, then at Enkiel, and slightly raised his eyebrows. Why would Nicola and Enkiel be together? Could it be that they had already discussed a series of plans? Then, in their plans, did they also discuss how to deal with him? "Your Excellency Nicola, it seems like you really know Raphael." Enkiel looked at Nicola with a smile. "Why do you say that?" Nicola laughed. "You just said that Raphael would definitely come." Intuition. Nicola's answer was very simple. Intuition? You really believe in this? Ha, Raphael, do you believe it or not? Nicola looked at Hanjin. Me? Sometimes I believe, sometimes I don't. The three powerhouses had overlooked a small episode. When Ankiel spoke to the other two, she always used honorifics, but when Nicola and Hanjin spoke to each other, they seemed to have forgotten etiquette. Perhaps this was an expression of hostility between them. They did not want to admit each other's existence, but they had to. At this moment, a roar came from afar. It turned out that there was a Hell's Gate in the center of the ancient castle. To the abyssal races, this was a very safe place, so the troops stationed there were far less than those on the surface. Nicola and Ankiel's sudden intrusion almost instantly destroyed all the defenses. This sudden attack was really unexpected, and the powerhouses left behind in the Abyss world only reacted now. Hanjin looked back at the Hell's Gate that he had broken through. It was completely calm. It seemed like the Flame Tyrant, Lonker, and Donald did not dare to rashly chase after him. Who's on your side? Nicola noticed Hanjin's actions. The Flame Tyrant, Lonker, Hanjin replied. Sending such a person to deal with you was Donald's fatal mistake, Nicola said calmly. I heard that the fallen angel Catherine has already joined you. Although his tone was arrogant, he really had the right to judge the Flame Tyrant Lonker. Ankiel had the Deep Blue domain, Nicola had the Starry Sky domain, Donald had the Death and Decay domain, and Lonker had to rely on a lava barrier formed by countless evil fire spirits to protect himself. The difference between a domain and a barrier was the difference between their true power. On the long path of self-cultivation, these demigods seemed to be close to each other, but in reality, there was an insurmountable gap between them. Nicola, Donald, and Ankiel were undoubtedly in the first echelon, while the Flame Tyrant Lonker was in the second echelon, whether he admitted it or not. As for the fallen angel Catherine, the strength of an angel far exceeded that of a powerhouse in a broad sense. Even though she had lost the ability to release light magic, Catherine could still rely on her incomparably powerful strength and extreme speed to rank among the top echelons. You can't say that she's joined me. We're just friends, Hanjin said softly. I also want a friend like that. Nicola once again revealed a cynical smile. Aren't we friends? Ankiel smiled sweetly. Would you believe me if I said we are? Nicola shrugged. If you believe me, you wouldn't have to force Harriet to marry me. Speaking of which, I remember now. Ankiel's eyes shone brightly. If we can get out of here alive, Sir Nicola will hold a wedding with the guardian of the dragon domain, Harriet. Lord Raphael, will you come? You won't be stingy with giving the newlyweds your sincere blessings, right? Hanjin's gaze fell on Nicola. He caught a flash of helplessness. He didn't expect that someone as overbearing as Nicola would finally compromise with the dragons. It seems that a marriage with the dragons should be able to reap many benefits. Hanjin smiled. His words were somewhat sinister. Not only did he provoke the relationship between Nicola and the dragons, he also mocked Nicola, hinting that Nicola had compromised because of the temptation of those benefits. Nonsense. I'm starting to dislike you. Nicola's eyes were filled with displeasure and mischief. Are you moved? Want to learn from me? Don't worry, you'll have a chance. Hanjin was still thinking about what kind of price the dragons would have to pay. The negotiation had already failed, but Ankiel had still left the hammer of Thor and the bow of Howling behind, which showed how generous she was. Therefore, what Ankiel had paid Nicolai must be far more than the two holy weapons. Because Hanjin's mind was not here, he didn't realize Nicolai's hidden meaning for a moment. It was not until he noticed Nicolai's strange expression that he suddenly realized that there was a chance. What chance? Don't tell me you're talking about Ankiel? Ankiel's eyes turned cold. It was obvious that she didn't like this kind of joke. She glanced at Nicola, then turned her gaze to Hanjin. Lord Raphael, it seemed that she was looking forward to Hanjin's visit to the magnificent Light Empire's Iron Fist City. At this moment, a few tall figures appeared on top of the castle walls. They looked down and coldly sized up the people below. Abyssal great demons. However, Hanjin, Nicola, and Ankiel acted as if they didn't see anything. They appeared abnormally calm. Hanjin changed the topic. Nicola, have you ever thought about the situation the magnificent Light Empire will face without you? Will your people be able to block Donald's attack? I'm not used to thinking so much when doing things. Nicola couldn't help but laugh when he said this, as if he felt embarrassed because he had said a lame lie that even he didn't believe. The powerhouses of the Abyss world always want to run to our world to stir up trouble, but it's difficult for us to use the same method to repay them. This can't be. This absolutely can't be. I hate this kind of injustice. It's time for them to pay the price. What about your magnificent Light Empire? Hanjin stared at Nicola, trying to figure out Nicola's true intentions. That's not important. I used more than 10 years to create a magnificent Light Empire. Give me another 10 years, and I can still do it, and I can even do it better. Nicholas faintly said, I can risk everything to fight Donald, but does Donald dare to do it? How could he watch us destroy his demon palace and his demon pool without doing anything? I can guarantee that he'll come back. The roars grew louder and louder. They could already see countless long-horned demons and evil spirits rushing over the corpses of their companions. The abyssal great demons on the castle walls also slowly raised their scythes. Go back. Ankiel suddenly raised her voice. This is meaningless. Huh. Nicola laughed loudly. Ankiel, you're really an anomaly among the dragons. Your kindness makes others feel ashamed. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 549. The words Ankiel were like a bolt from the blue, causing the expressions of the abyssal great demons on the city wall to change. The great demons had the same feelings as the surface races when they saw Donald and Catherine. Hanjin and Nicholas were both rising stars. Before Donald decided to start a world war, the demigod powerhouse he was most wary of was Ankiel. Otherwise, he would not have transferred Prince Hani away for the battlefield. The church was destroyed by the infighting between the races on the ground. If Ankiel was killed as well, Donald believed that victory would definitely belong to the abyssal race. Unfortunately, Prince Hani appeared at the wrong time. The giant dragons of Dragon City and Dragon Realm had just found Ankiel and awakened her. Hani's fate was obvious when he faced the most powerful battle group of the Golden Dragon race. The great demons on the city wall were afraid. Although their mission was to ensure the stability of the Abyss world, and they did not join the expedition, they more or less knew about the situation. Moreover, since Ankiel appeared here, the other two would definitely not be easy to deal with. At this moment, about hundreds of long-horned demons and evil spirits rushed out of the castle. They let out angry roars and charged straight at Hanjin and the other two. Nicholas looked at Hanjin, and Hanjin looked back at him. The former wanted to see the mysterious magic with his own eyes, while the latter wanted to understand the true power of the galaxy of stars. Neither wanted to make a move. Ankiel sighed softly. Her voice was filled with pity and helplessness. Then two ice rings appeared out of thin air, enveloping Hanjin and Nicholas respectively. Deep blue, with a soft shout, Ankiel pointed her right hand at the approaching longhorned demons. A startling azure light blossomed from Ankiel's fingertip, instantly turning into a canopy that covered an area of several hundred meters. Countless tiny icicles danced and spiraled in the air like a steaming mist. The bright red soil was suddenly covered in a layer of snow-white frost, and the thickness of the frost was still increasing. Frantically vibrating magic waves rolled in all directions like silent thunder. Even if they were more than 100 miles away from the castle, they could still clearly feel the changes in the elements. It was as if the camera had suddenly stopped moving. All the abyssal warriors within a few hundred meters of Ankiel had turned into ice sculptures. However, they were not the ones who suffered the most. but the abyssal warriors outside the deep blue domain. The freezing air had already seeped out of the deep blue domain, causing the temperature in the air to drop far below freezing point. However, this temperature was not enough to turn the abyssal warriors into ice sculptures instantly. They still had the ability to move, but the muscles and blood vessels beneath their skin had already been frozen stiff. This was how the tragedy happened. While they were running at full speed, their legs and arms kept cracking open. However, their frozen nerves prevented them from feeling any pain. By the time they could no longer support themselves and fell to the ground, their bodies were already covered in dense cracks like a spider web. Some of the longhorned demons were half naked. Their chests were frozen stiff, and they could no longer breathe. They subconsciously opened their mouths, and the corners of their mouths cracked open without hesitation, even to the roots of their ears. Some felt their vision blur, and they could not see clearly. Of course, their frozen eyeballs could not maintain their vision. They tried to open their eyes wider, but the moment they exerted force, their fragile eyelids cracked open. Among the few abyssal great demons, one of them did not react at all and was frozen on the castle wall. The other three had already disappeared. However, they could not teleport out of the deep blue domain. The next moment, an abyssal great demon appeared in the air. Like the longhorned demons and evil spirits, his body turned into an ice sculpture in an instant. He then fell straight from the sky and landed on the ground. With a bang, his body was smashed into pieces and scattered all over the ground. However, there was a red glow in the shattered ice. It was the color of blood. The other two great demons appeared at the edge of the deep blue domain. Unfortunately, they could not teleport again. Their tall figures and eyes, filled with unwillingness, were covered in frost. Hanjin was shocked. The power of the deep blue domain was far beyond his expectations. No wonder Ankiel had used such a tone to talk about Prince Hani on the God of War. It was as if she did not put him in her eyes at all. So this was the reason. Once she opened her domain, no matter how many abyssal demons there were, they would not be able to get close to her, unless they also had a domain. After a few breaths of time, Ankiel had already retracted her domain. She said softly, "Let's go." Just like that, Nicholas stared at the hundreds of silent eye sculptures, and a playful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "It's too easy on them," Hanjin said indifferently. As soon as his voice fell, his divine sense turned into a deafening roar and swept forward like a gust of wind. Boom! Boom, boom, boom. The hundreds of ice sculptures were shattered one after another by the divine sense, turning into a splattering of flowers. The remaining three great demons were also unable to escape this calamity. They turned into messy chunks of flesh and blood on the ground. They were snow white and blood red. It was a particularly shocking sight. Ankiel slowly lowered her eyes. It seemed that she could not bear it, but it did not seem like she was faking it. To put it bluntly, acting in front of Nicholas and Hanjin was too difficult. There was no need for her to challenge it. "Raphael, you are really a strange person," Nicholas said with a smile. Nicholas smiled and said, "Sometimes you are very annoying. Sometimes you are very likable. For example, right now. Next time, if there is such an opportunity, I will give it to you." Hanjin looked through the gate of the castle. "Actually, you are also very strange. I heard others say that you're not an easy person to get along with." It turns out that what they said was not entirely correct. Who did you hear it from? Jedis or Zinglin? Nicholas's face became cold. They all said it. Is there a problem? Hanjin laughed. Why did you deliberately mention them? Nicholas's voice was very soft. You see, I'm beginning to hate you again. You too, if there is anything, can you talk about it after we leave the abyss? Ankiel said coldly. In fact, she had been having a headache. This time, Nicholas was determined to attack the abyss. It would definitely become a variable in the entire war, and the situation of the war would become clear. This was the fundamental reason why she decided to join. Ankiel was worried that Hanjin and Nicholas, the two polar opposites of the world, would really fight each other in the Abyss world, just like the Black Dragon King Valentine and the Golden Dragon King Milu. who knew that they were wrong, but still chose to go all the way. In the end, it would lead to the tragedy of hurting oneself before hurting the enemy. With her help, at least they could find a balance and restraint. It has dragged on for too long. Nicholas's gaze moved away from Hanjin. The demon warriors should have made sufficient preparations on the other side of the gates of hell. Lord Raphael, please walk at the front. Is this revenge? Hanjin smiled. I'm not that narrow-minded, Nicholas said. You have a life puppet, don't you? Besides, you're late. Otherwise, we might have already broken through the gates of hell. This is your plan? Hanjin smiled as usual. You should be grateful to me. I'm the one who saved you. Lord Raphael, you mean? Enkiel was stunned. On the other side of the gates of hell is the cursed hill. There is still a magic formation set up by the death god of the arrow of the gods. Hanjin said softly, if the two of you think you can fight against the death god, you can go ahead with your plan. However, I will not accompany you. How do you know? Nicholas's expression changed. He knew about the cursed hill, but he did not know that there was a death trap hidden in the cursed hill. According to common sense, this should be the core secret of the demon race. Not to mention Hanjin, even the fallen angel Catherine, who had joined Hanjin, would not know about this. Understand yourself and your enemies. Only then can you win every battle. Did you not think of anything before you entered the gates of hell? Nicholas fell silent. It was not that he did not want to understand, but that he had no way of understanding. Lord Raphael, what do you think we should do? Enkiel asked. Go that way. Hanjin pointed to the west. About 200 miles, there is a lava mountain that stretches for hundreds of miles. There are 3 paths there. One leads to the Sulphur Plains, which is the territory of the Black Dragons. Another path leads to the surface world, and another path leads down. After passing by a few cities, we can enter Grave Valley City. Grave Valley City? I have heard of it. It seems to be the largest city in the Abyss world. Enkiel paused. Lord Raphael, do you know about Grave Valley City? A little. Hanjin smiled. Although Grave Valley City is not the gathering place of the demon race, it is only 100 miles away from the Demon Mountain. It is precisely because of the protection of the demon race that Grave Valley City has evolved into the largest city in the Abyss world. If we can destroy it, it will cause devastating damage to the reputation of the demon race. If we can't even protect Grave Valley City, it is hard to imagine that the demons have the ability to protect other cities, and the abyssal races will lose confidence. How far is Grave Valley City from the lava mountain you mentioned? Enkiel asked seriously. It should be 700 or 800 miles away, and the path is rather complicated. There are too many forks in the Abyss world, Hanjin said. But I know how to go. 700 or 800 miles is not too far. With our speed, we can reach it in 2 days at most. Enkiel's gaze fell on Nicola. Lord Nicola, what do you think? This sentence had already proved Enkiel's attitude. She supported Hanjin's suggestion. Nicola remained silent. He suddenly realized that he was facing a different kind of battle. He, Frost, Dragon Enkiel, and Raphael were already the 3 giants of the surface races. With the 3 of them together, it was impossible for them to act on their own. Even if it was a temporary mercenary team, they still needed a leader. Under the situation of equal strength and status, the one who knew the enemy better would be the leader. This was very natural. The problem was that he was unwilling to accept this. Everyone who saw Hanjin for the first time would more or less be deceived by his appearance. Hanjin was young, his eyes were clear, and his smile was full of sunshine. To put it simply, he was more like a carefree big boy than a powerhouse who was decisive in killing and whose hands were stained with blood. Although Nicola understood some things about Hanjin from various angles, he also made a mistake when he saw Hanjin for the first time. It had nothing to do with strength. He doubted that someone as young as Hanjin would have the shrewdness and scheming to match his strength. The information he had obtained also told him that Hanjin had done many wrong things. If it were him, he was confident that he would have done better. Therefore, Hanjin was definitely far inferior in these aspects. The facts immediately taught him a lesson. Hanjin kept saying that he had saved everyone. First, he pushed himself to the highest point of morality. Then, he showed that he knew the abyss world like the back of his hand. His intention was very obvious. He wanted the other two demigods to temporarily obey his arrangements and follow Hanjin. At this moment, Nicola even suspected that there was a magic array left by the death god Hamas on the cursed hill. Was all of this Hanjin's tricks? Perhaps in the eyes of others, there was nothing to consider. For the sake of the overall situation, whoever's suggestion was correct should be immediately executed. But to Nicola, it was not so simple. The king could not meet the king. This was not only the rule of the chessboard, but also the portrayal of reality. It contained unimaginable killing intent. Now, for the sake of the entire war, they were walking together and trying their best to maintain harmony. This was already the limit of Nicola's patience. Now, they still had to obey? Lord Nicola? Enkiel urged impatiently. You stupid dragon. A cynical smile appeared on Nicola's face again, but in his heart, he was mocking Enkiel. No wonder after the fall of the Golden Dragon King Milu, you were unable to stop the division of the Golden Dragon clan. In the end, you had to leave and live in seclusion. Ha! Now that the Golden Dragon clan is in trouble, I have to find you. Once the situation calms down, you'll have to scram. It turned out that he, Nicola, had made two mistakes. He had underestimated Hanjin and overestimated Enkiel. Let's go, Nicola said softly. Nikolai said softly. Although he did not agree or disagree, he expressed his decision in a roundabout way. If he rejected Hanjin's suggestion, he would have to break through the last gate of hell. If what Hanjin said was true, then he would become a joke passed down through the ages. A negative example of someone who suffered misfortune because he did not trust his companions. Or, he could choose to hide in the abyss for a period of time and leave all the burdens to Hanjin and Enkiel. If he succeeded, he would reap the benefits. If he failed, he could return to the surface and be his final hero. But at Nicola's height, he would never choose a foolish shortcut. The reason he was able to come to this day and create brilliant achievements was because he had the courage to face everything head-on. Disappointment, pain, helplessness, loneliness, and separation of life and death. He had experienced them and faced them calmly. It was the same now. The so-called cultivation was ultimately the cultivation of one's heart and will. If he escaped, his footsteps would come to an abrupt halt. Okay. Enkiel turned around. Her eyes flickered, and a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Then, she regained her calmness and took the lead to shoot into the distance. Hanjin did not seem to expect Nicola to compromise without any fighting strength. He was stunned for a moment. Then, he unsheathed the long sword in his hand, stepped on the purple light, and chased after Enkiel. Nicola stared at Hanjin's back. His eyes were cold and calm. After a moment, he raised his foot and shot forward like a cannonball. The three of them headed west. They chose different methods. Enkiel used flight, but her speed was not as fast as the baby undying bird, nor was it as fast as Catherine. Of course, perhaps she did not use her full strength, just like when she activated the deep blue domain. They had no support here, and they might not be able to find a place to rest. Thus, they had to maintain their fighting strength as much as possible. Hanjin's figure was the most leisurely and carefree, which matched his handsome appearance perfectly. It was as if he was on a scenic tour. It was said that a sword saint who had his own domain could fly in the air, but Nicola relied entirely on his feet to travel. Every step he took left a deep footprint in the bright red soil. Around the footprint were irregular cracks that were thin, thick, long, and short. Then, his body pierced through the air like an arrow. He even made bursts of whistling sounds as he shot out 50 to 60 meters before slowing down. Then he took another step. About half an hour after Hanjin and the others left the castle, the two Hell's Gates outside the castle and the Hell's Gate in the castle blossomed with light at the same time. Then, countless longhorned demons swarmed in, and the abyssal demons were hidden among the cannon fodder. There was no one outside the castle. There were only countless scattered blood-red ice cubes that were gradually melting into blood. Donald's tall figure appeared. With a flash, he appeared on the city wall and silently observed the messy scene. It had only been 10 days, but he seemed to have aged a lot. If it were someone else, they might have already collapsed or gone crazy from the successive blows. However, Donald's figure was still upright. The moment the death god's projection descended, he had already sensed it. He also knew that he had lost a brother forever. At that time, he hated Hanjin far more than he hated Nicola. However, he could not give up halfway. War was not child's play. What made him feel even more helpless was that he could only keep the news of Prince Johnson's death a secret. Otherwise, the morale of the army would suffer another blow. Several abyssal demons flashed into surroundings at the same time. They were searching for traces left by the enemy. Hanjin and Ankiel had left through the air, so naturally, they did not leave behind anything. However, Nicola's footprints were particularly conspicuous. There was one every 60 to 70 meters, extending into the distance. An abyssal great demon followed the footprints and looked to the west. Then, with a few flashes, he returned to Donald's side and whispered, "Your Majesty, they seem to be going to Lava Mountain." Lava Mountain? What are they going there for? Donald seemed to be asking the great demon, but also seemed to be asking himself, "Your Majesty, then should we chase after them?" Donald narrowed his eyes. One Nicola was already a huge headache for him. With Hanjin and Ankiel, he had no chance of winning. Even if he did achieve victory, the demons would definitely pay a heavy price. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.